Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze of the Conscious Resistance Network, and I'm here again with Ian Carroll. What's going on, man?
What's up, dude? Stoked to talk again.
Yeah, I'm excited for this. I think people are excited for this as well. And as the title implies out there, guys, we're talking Trump's first 60 days. I think 60 days officially passed on the 21st, so we're just a few days past that. Trump was inaugurated January 21st, of course. And we're going to cover everything that, Ian, that you want to get into that you think are positive things. Of course, I can talk about a few that I could say are on the positive side, and obviously I have a lot of criticisms and concerns, and I think we'll get into a lot of things here. So, where would you like to pick up?
Um, I mean, let's get some of the really shitty things out of the way first, right? Like let's get the Israel stuff out of the way first because it's the elephant in the room, and we can talk through that for a second and get it out of the way. I'm sure it'll come back up, but I think it's undeniable for anyone that actually has an understanding of geopolitics right now that Trump and his whole cabinet stance on Israel has been atrocious for the most part, and it's been somewhat confusing how atrocious it is. Not to say that we didn't know that they were all Zionists, but like you were commenting on Bobby Kennedy's post today, where Bobby Kennedy called October 7th a Holocaust, and he, like, one of his first actions as like director of HHS was to declare anti-Semitism one of the greatest plagues of like pandemics in American history. It's like, what are you talking about, bro? To the point where I start to like really wonder, like, is bro blackmailed? Like that's the kind of stuff that just is so far out there and so unnecessary for his position that I start to wonder if that is actually blackmail and not just straight up Zionism. Um, but beyond that, like the war mongering and the bombing in Yemen and the overthrow of Assad that's happened lately, like not all of it is directly Trump's fault. A lot of this is like geopolitics that has been put in play for over long periods of time. But I think that we can probably agree that the entire Middle Eastern stance so far as it's played out has been pretty horrible. I'd be curious for your thoughts. Oh, I can't hear you for a second. Get the mic back while everyone's getting in here. This is fun because Derek and I, we tend to disagree and debate a lot in sort of middle like journalistic space where facts are facts, which is I'm so refreshed by debating real topics with people that are informed, that actually, because the problem is that so many leftists are so uninformed and in the like leftist cult of uh the psyop that is modern leftism, that there's like so few people, it feels like, to actually debate with. So it's always so fun to talk to Derek because it's like I love actually having like people that disagree that are informed to actually discuss these things with, because so much of the left is just kind of off the rocker, and so it's not really as engaging or interesting to actually talk about issues with them.
Better now?
Yeah, I got you now.
Cool. Yeah, just to pick up where you were saying there. I mean, first off, yeah, what you were saying there about having these conversations. Everybody, this is the second time Ian and I are talking. We have spoken offline, and Ian, I've shared with you that we have differences of opinion, and my skepticism towards some of your views, but we keep things friendly enough to continue to have this dialogue, because I do agree with you and the effort you're making with your event and bottom up and stuff like that to try to have outreach and more dialogue. Even if I disagree with you in certain areas or whatever, I still think that's absolutely important. And then to your point with Kennedy, man, I do have to wonder, and is he being blackmailed in some way? Because I'll pull it up right now. You were talking about first we had the statement from
and I will say that while you're pulling that up, I'll say that I heard, I'm not going to say what I heard specifically because I don't need to air out more than is out, but I did hear about, salacious things that were going to be leaked during the campaign season that never got leaked around Bobby. And so I start to wonder, like, are those things being held as blackmail over him? The things that I heard about didn't feel like the kind of blackmail that could get this kind of a response, but I don't know how else to describe this shit.
Yeah, it's a tough one, man. And like so again, our conversation before was, I think it was October. It was right before the election or a couple weeks before the election. Yep. And I was expressing my skepticism towards, what Kennedy could truly do. And even my deeper skepticism, more on the conspiratorial side of my brain of like, is he really who he claims to be? And I know you have or had, I don't know where you're at now, but high confidence in that. Like you said, maybe there's some things that didn't get leaked. I think also with what you did, I mean, admittedly, you did a great job on Joe Rogan outlining the
Thanks, man.
blackmail aspect of Epstein. Like, we can't deny that, you know, there is probably some element of that, even just, you know, not to get too off track here, but just to even see in the last couple of days, accused rapist Conor McGregor now saying like, you know, get behind Israel and this and that. It seems like, and Russell Brand, you know, also had some accusations against him. And then he starts going, you know, basically, if not completely pro-Zionist, definitely kind of trying to walk some middle ground, I think, which I don't think is really accurate.
Doesn't
And
align with the rest of his image for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And so to me, that definitely does bring in the whole blackmail conversation of like, are certain people, there's no secret that RFK, you know, in his own words, has a wild history when he was younger, as many people have. I'm not trying to hold him in the past. I'm just saying those are the sort of things, especially if they're more salacious than what is admitted in public, that a nation like Israel and other intelligence agencies, not just Israel, would want to use against a person to, you know, for whatever reasons, just to make them useful to their agenda. So what I'm showing on screen to everybody who's watching, this was the first announcement we got earlier in March. So it's been just a couple weeks ago when HHS, which a lot of people were like, what the heck does HHS have to do with, you know, anti-Semitism? And it was basically just, from what I could see, another way, which is what I had warned about in our first conversation, that Trump and his association with Israel and his claims of we're going to get rid of the anti-Semitism and labeling anybody who protests Israel or who are pro-Palestine activists as pro-Hamas activists, and how he was going to use that. And so the way it tied into the HHS is because Columbia University has contracts with the federal government, of course, including through HHS. So this was like a way for Trump and RFK to kind of put that pressure on Columbia University. And that was a couple weeks ago. And he said, anti-Semitism, like racism, is a spiritual and moral malady that sickens society and kills people with lethalities compared to history's most deadly plagues. And yeah, I thought that was just like, what the heck? And, you know,
to be fair, like true anti-Semitism, where people are actually calling for the extermination of a people, sure, totally. Like, I hate that. I'm not with it. But what we're talking about is free speech protesting about a genocide and a war.
And that's what it really comes down to, is people who are critical of Israel. I think that everybody in this audience is mostly probably going to be aware that when we're speaking of that, yeah, we're not talking about some legitimate Nazi who wants to go violently shoot up or kill or, you know, wishes ill on someone just because they're Jewish. That's definitely not something I support. And even the fact that we have to say that, it shows you how far this conversation has gone. That people are like, oh wait, I'm not one of those people. But truly though, just being critical of Israel is now labeled anti-Semitic. And this has been going on for longer than Trump's been around, but it's definitely doesn't help that Trump and his, you know, donations and support from Miriam Adelson and the relationship with Netanyahu and others. So that was a couple weeks ago. And then here's today's thing where they're announcing like basically that their effort was successful, putting pressure on Columbia University, Trump threatening funding. And, you know, now they're starting to go after some of the students. We'll talk about that a little bit. But today, RFK said, where is this? He says, and this is to me is just like above and beyond, like what the hell? He
like
says,
you don't need to say these things.
This, even just the word, right? He says, so instead of inspiring universal condemnation, the October 7th Holocaust triggered a global wave of anti-Semitism. Ivy League campuses became a greenhouse for poison. Trump has ordered his cabinet to use every constitutional tool to uproot this divisive weed. I'm glad Columbia has agreed to this first step, yada, yada, yada. So again, they're basically celebrating that we put pressure on them and they buckled. Now Columbia is like expelling students. They're coming up with new rules, and they list some of those rules here of like different things they're going to change. But so I'm sure on their end, they're celebrating. But for most of us, we're just like, what the heck is this? And that, I mean, specifically the use of the word Holocaust. Like, exactly. If I was somebody, a survivor of the Holocaust, like whatever your opinions on that, because I know there's a lot of them out there, I would be offended by that. I'd be like, you're seriously comparing, you know, at least what is alleged. Now, I'm one of the people who thinks that the Holocaust has been exaggerated in some different ways. I don't think it certainly has been false. Colored. Yeah.
The history is very much just like the history of October 7th.
Exactly. But even with that, like trying to make that comparison is just ridiculous. It's insane. And I don't think there's any reasonable person other than just hardcore Zionists who are going to be lapping that up. And unfortunately, there's a lot of them. And This just one question, man. I want to kind of get your view on this before we go further. What is your feeling or your interaction, private, public, etc., with some of these conservative influencers, so to speak? Like, for example, the whole crowd that got all the Epstein documents
Yeah.
and waved them around. Like that whole crowd is, are hardcore Zionists, and they're just like, the Laura Loomers and others who are just going to praise Israel to no end. Are they friendly to you, or is that the group you're getting a lot of hate from for mentioning certain things on?
Great question. Some of them are pretty hardcore Zionists. I've not gotten any hate from them directly, and I don't interact with that crowd very much. There are a number of people in that group actually that played it pretty low key that most people didn't even notice were there, because they kind of actually listened to what Pam had kind of asked them to do and didn't make a big show of it. Like Jessica Reed Krause, I'm more friendly with her, and I've spoken with her a lot more on and off the air, and I like her a lot. And to my knowledge, she is not pro-Zionist really. She definitely has complex takes like about Ghislaine and stuff like that, but and then another person is Savannah Hernandez, who I know of from her affiliation with InfoWars in the past, and now is more independent. And she also got one of those binders and was there, but did not make a big show of it. So there were a few that were not super Zionist, but for the most part, they were relatively Zionist. DC Drano and I had a bit of a conversation in the background, and he was really explicit that he would, like, I had put out this video about, like, would you push the button and release the Epstein files if they implicated Israel? And he was very clear, adamant that, like, he would go on record saying, like, yes, I would push the button. I am America first. And I respected that, even though I disagree with a lot of his, views. And I don't necessarily agree with the way he goes about his social media presence, but I also am not super familiar with it. So I think that I kind of judged a little too harshly on some of them at my first take because I wasn't as familiar with them. I'm not saying I agree with all of them by any means, but that whole situation was so bungled and such a bummer. Like in getting more of the backstory from people like Jessica, people like Savannah, it sounds like it got kind of spun as though Bondi was. They said, this is not new. These binders are not new. Nothing in these binders are new. Here's the letter that's me saying this is bullshit to the FBI, saying get more documents. So I'm inclined to give a little bit of grace around that and reserve a little bit of judgment for Pam. I do understand that when you have a giant blackmail file like this on half of our government, more or less, it's very touchy and very hard to come out. But I'm not holding my breath, but I am willing to understand there's a lot of complicated circumstances here. And a good example of these complicated circumstances are these campus protests, which is like, yeah, it's atrocious that we're outlawing free speech on college campuses and we're criminalizing protesting, which is like the soul of American government, basically. But it's also true at the same time that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Soros Foundation are funneling money to those protests to basically be paid agitator programs, is what it looks like. And so there's like more than one thing happening within all of these fields, and there's subversion overlapping with genuine American movements. And it's really hard to peel apart, for me at least, especially being less experienced here in this field. It's hard to peel apart, like, what is the Trump administration going after subversive actions by the sort of deep state versus what is Trump administration just going off on the rails of profit and money, or Israel and Zionism, or whatever it is, right? And it seems to be a fair mixture of both in most cases, as far as I can tell. And it's hard for me to draw the moral line between, like, where is ending the subversion of America by this deep state kind of end, and where does profit taking and Zionism begin in a lot of these realms.
Yeah, no, I'll give you that. It's some of these situations are complex. I do want to pick up on the protests in just a bit, but maybe since we started with RFK and his anti-Semitism, you want to just go further? I know that you were.
Yeah, let's talk about RFK a little bit.
You told me before that Maha was one of the main things that even got you to support Trump in the first place. That you were originally an RFK supporter, and then the Maha MAGA kind of integration is what brought you on board. So maybe you could just share a bit about what you're excited about that's happened in the Maha region and the last 60 days, and then we can talk about maybe some of what's not looking that great.
Yeah, I'm excited about a lot of the sort of like individual actions he's taking on actual health and actual pharma kind of things, where like there's actual, like the Fox News article where Fox News inserted that headline about the vaccines underneath his title, where he kind of got played by Fox News, if you remember the one I'm talking about. The actual text of that article was dope. It was a great article where he did bring up a lot of great facts and get it into the mainstream kind of zeitgeist. And things like banning food additives. They're going after the GRAS system, the generally recognized as safe system. So they are making a lot of sick progress towards actual basic Maha movement and initiatives. And there's also an element of both logically and in the public view, but also behind the scenes. There's a lot of chatter about how Bobby's hands are still somewhat tied until he gets all of his appointments in position and actually gets his full team into HHS. And so I'm also trying to give myself a little bit of grace to wait to see how Maha plays out. And I'm also strongly of the belief that a lot of it is on us to continue to sort of maintain that public support, public sentiment, because ultimately health choices come down to our choices, and our food choices, our health choices. And so I super hesitate to be negative about Maha, because though his Zionism sucks ass, what he's done for Maha, I am relatively stoked about. And this is the article, great example, where my understanding is that he wrote the article and he wrote the title, and then Fox News inserted the secondary title, MMR vaccine is crucial to avoiding potentially deadly disease. And he kind of got played by them in the way that he probably could have, asserted that I want a final proofread of exactly what's going to go to print, which he clearly failed to do. At least I assume he failed to do. But when you actually do read through the text of the article, it does actually start to break open a lot more sort of the nuance and depth of what's really going on with measles and what's really going on with vaccines and how they work. So I do remain optimistic.
Let's go through some of these pieces, because I'll give you that. I think that you're accurate, and it's fair to say, and I want to be objective here, that you're right, that this is often a common practice, not just because of RFK, but you can have an editor. This is even in independent media. When I work with Mint Press News, for example, I can write a whole article. I can have a title for it. When I send it into the editors, it might come back with a different title. Maybe they added a subheading based on my own words typically. So this, though, obviously, I haven't heard RFK or anybody ask him directly to say, hey, was that subheading yours? Was every single word?
I haven't heard it from his mouth directly.
You also have like this. So, for example, you get past the first paragraph and there's kind of this block quote, which it's unclear if that's part of the flowing of the article, or again, that was like another inserted thing. Because if it is his own words, this is pretty outright, endorsement of vaccines. It says vaccines not only protect individual children from measles, but also contribute to community immunity, protecting those who are unable to be vaccinated due to medical reasons, which I think for the most part seems like a non-controversial statement for many people. But I think for those of us who were paying attention during COVID, and especially to RFK's work and the work he's done over the years, questioning specifically, not just any vaccine, but specifically the measles MMR vaccine. If
it's one
that
of the most
was
egregious offenders.
Yeah, exactly. And if that's his own words, then that's kind of, I think out of alignment. But I'm going to not even try to put that in the like slam dunk category, because at the moment we don't know. Was this block quote inserted? Was the subheading inserted? And those are the more, I think, bold statements kind of embracing that. But there are a couple of other things that I will give, credit to where credit's due. Let me see if I can find it. Like one that says it should be a choice somewhere in here. That
And earlier, there's a section that you just scrolled past where it talks about how virtually every child in America used to get measles, which is
right here,
is like a subtle normalizing of like, remember, guys, like this used to just be chicken pox in a certain way.
Yeah, and I think also he slips in here. So it says the DSHS reports that 79 of the confirmed cases involved individuals who had not received the MMR vaccine, while 62 cases had unknown vaccination status. At least 5 had received MMR vaccine. Now, I think if I was to take a most charitable look at this from the side of his supporters, I would say, hey, look, he mentioned this. At least 5 had received the MMR vaccine, which, like you said, is kind of subtly making it clear, even if, that if you had the vaccine, you could end up sick. But I think also the statement before, making it say, which may just be the facts that they have in their database, whether accurate or not, that 79 cases were people who had not received it. And this whole thing, though, this is a bigger topic that I haven't had time to dive into, but I've seen a few things that sometimes hospitals or reports are putting unknown vaccine status, even if a person hasn't been vaccinated. Or if they have been vaccinated, like they're kind of obfuscating, like we saw with COVID, like so sort of like unknown, when it may have been people who were vaccinated, which would sort of put a hole in their argument of this thing stopping measles.
But the way I see it is I personally do not expect RFK to come out against vaccines first at all. I think that would be kind of career suicide on his part to go to, before he's even gotten his whole team in, to come out guns blazing against vaccines is just like not how you win the fight. So I'm not saying I think he's playing 5D chess, but I would not expect that to be the first chess move to go after vaccines. I would be much more, if I was in this position, I wouldn't go after vaccines first. I would go after low-hanging fruit like the GRAS system, like food additives that make no sense that are already banned in other countries, and start to get wins under your belt. So I don't really I'm not super stressed about his current take on vaccines as much as his long-term full approach to it. And I am expecting there to be some sort of reconciliation for COVID, but I guess expecting is the wrong word. I'm hoping, and I think the American people should expect, but I worry that they're going to try to sweep it under the rug because Trump is too affiliated with the original vaccines.
Yeah, I agree. And look, I'll just provide a little bit of, my sort of thoughts on that, and we'll go back to this article in a second. I think that there's this sort of double standard that I see with MAGA and Maha, where on one hand, I'm told by a lot of people, not saying you've made this argument, but I definitely see this online, that when Trump won the election, he's coming in like, this is it. We're about to clean house. We're going to bring in all our people, Maha, everything, the Pfizer people are going down. And then bit by bit, it's like, I hear things sort of like what you just said, which is like, well, they need to be smart, or they need to, he wouldn't have, like, for example, when RFK was at his confirmation hearing, he said he endorsed the childhood vaccine schedule. He said he stood by the MMR vaccine. Like, these are things that I guess if I was in a position, which is probably why I'm not there, I would come out bold and strong, like what you were saying he shouldn't do. I would say, like, look, if you got allegedly this mandate from the whole country, right? Like, come in and kick ass. Like, come in and say, like, no, I've been working on this for 20 years. We have the evidence. I'm going to get in there and we're going to prove it. Because on one hand, people say, well, he wouldn't have got the votes, this and that, but he was never going to get the Democrat votes. I mean, there was only like one or two Republicans, I think Cassidy was one of them, that he had to convince. Now, maybe he would have lost those if he had come out bold like that, or lost that one. But still, the Democrats didn't really have enough power to ultimately stop most of these things. And I think all of them ended up going against him anyways, no matter what sort of things he tried to offer them, which included saying, no, I stand by the childhood vaccine schedule, which he has railed against, rightfully so, plenty of times over the last decade, and endorsing the measles vaccine, which now he's kind of, slightly embracing with this latest thing. So I guess I get sick of, or dissatisfied with these kind of responses that say like again, where I'm being told on one hand, Trump is like just all knowing and just, God Emperor Trump and here to do all this crazy stuff. But then at the same time, no, he needs to be super careful because the deep state is going to stop him. And I mean, at this point, he's got all his people in there, right? He's got Kash Patel. And that doesn't mean there aren't other ways that this deep state, which does exist. I don't agree with the framing of the deep state, by the way, the way that MAGA and Trump uses it. I think that's been,
it's definitely an overused, tired word.
Well, not only that, but they frame it like there's two things I see wrong with it. Often it's like, for example, the other day, Netanyahu said the leftist deep state is trying to take me down. That's part of it, is they've tricked a lot of people into thinking, and they being like the Trump camp and that movement, that it's just the progressives. It's just the radical pedophile Democrats. That's the deep state. Or it's just bureaucracy. It's just, administrative paper pushers. But that was never the original definition by Peter Dale Scott, who's the first guy who brought it into the English language from the original Turkish deep state term. And that was like this, the intelligence agencies, Wall Street, the oil industry, this bigger apparatus, this shadow government, which I think is it's an older but more accurate term. So on one hand, people are saying he's fighting the deep state. He's, coming in doing this. But then whenever things don't go that way, or they're less than, like, say, with the Epstein thing or whatever, people come up with, and I'm not saying this is what you're doing, but people will try to explain it away and say, well, he can't do this and that. I just feel very dissatisfied with that. And maybe with time, I know we're only 2 months in, I'll be disproven, and they're going to, by year 4, they're going to have tested vaccines for autism. I know that conversation has
I hope
I will say that at least that has been discussed, like that they have mentioned a couple times testing vaccines for autism. I saw RFK mention like red dye and stuff like that. So I give credit on that. But overall, like, just to go back to the piece real quick, there's these lines right here that I feel like, again, maybe he's straddling, trying to play both worlds. But he says, as healthcare providers, community leaders, and policymakers, we have a shared responsibility to protect public health, including doing things like ensuring there's accurate information about vaccine safety and efficacy. Now, that could be from our angle of saying, hey, make sure the truth that they're not safe and they're not effective.
I see that as a loaded sentence right there.
Yeah. But then it gets to the last one. We must engage with communities and make vaccines readily accessible for all those who want them. Now, again, of course, that portion of those who want them. So that's better than saying, and it's mandatory for everybody. And so I feel like that gives him enough of this kind of wiggle room, and then mention of vitamin A. That's a positive thing. They're giving him crap on that. And then he does say the decision to vaccinate is a personal one. I feel like this whole paragraph, though, is kind of trying to, again, have it both ways. All parents should consult with healthcare providers to understand their options to get the MMR vaccine. So it's like to understand their options to get it, not like to understand whether they need it. And then the decision to vaccinate is a personal one, but then also adding vaccines not only protect individual children, but also contribute to community immunity, which is a huge debatable topic. And this is one of the things they've been trying to tell us that, like, since before COVID, that the only way we get community immunity is through vaccines and not just people getting sick.
But check out that next paragraph, because that next one is a fucking bomb to drop on the normie world of vaccines. Tens of thousands died with or of measles annually in the 19th century, but by 1960, before the vaccine's introduction, improvements in sanitation and nutrition had eliminated 98% of measles deaths, which is one of the big sort of elephants in the room that the vaccine industry does not want anyone to talk about, which is that a lot of these diseases were actually already basically eradicated just through basic sanitation and nutrition.
Absolutely. And I agree on that. I'm glad that's in there, and then obviously, again, the reference to vitamin A, C, and D, and B12, C, and E. Like, I appreciate all that, balanced diet and that sort of thing. And it just feels like a mixed bag overall, because the final statement we see is the measles outbreak is a call to action for all of us to reaffirm our commitment to health. Like, yeah. But to one of the points you said a couple minutes ago, which is what I would really agree with, and this is kind of where I always come back with these issues, we can move on after this, is that people just shouldn't be sitting around and assuming that Maha and Trump and RFK are going to solve all your problems. Like, your diet and your own personal actions are going to contribute way more than, not to say that if they do study a vaccine and learn that it's causing this or that problem, or they do take out this toxin from the food, that won't impact your life. But overall, you're the one making daily choices of what to put down your throat and what to eat and how to act and how lazy you are and all this sort of things that we know really are going to play. So I just hope more people are realizing that you can't sit around and wait for Trump or RFK to save your health.
Completely agree. There's another thing that you said earlier that I totally agree with, that is this flip-flopping thing that we see, and it's people in Trump's cabinet. And there's been a clip floating around about Tulsi flip-flopping on her position on Yemen just recently. And it's tragic to watch, but I also try to take it as instructive. And I don't know what way it needs to be instructive to us, because in some regard, it's like we're seeing, I would argue that on their way in, a lot of Trump's nominations, not all by any means, but a lot of them were some of the more highly morally qualified people that we've seen entering office in my lifetime. Like, RFK has spent his whole life fighting for, like, to clean up rivers and fighting for, like, against vaccine industry and all these things that, like, yeah, he's far from perfect, but he's one of the most sort of, like, unimaginable picks for a position given our history of political selections in America. But even Tulsi, all these people that had these stances that were sort of counter to that shadow government for so long, as soon as they get in, they're suddenly changing their language, and they're suddenly couching all their statements, and they're suddenly flip-flopping their ideals. And to me, part of that is instructive, that you're right, that government is just corrupt and that you can't trust them. But there's also a level where it's like, that might also be an indication in some regards that there are some serious forces at play, some powers that just absolutely tie people's hands when they get in there that we might not understand as civilians. And I try to hold both truths at once, because we still need to hold them accountable and we still need to watch all their actions. But I also try to remind myself that, like, I don't understand exactly what's going on up there. And hopefully they're doing their best. And so watching RFK and how his decisions play out over the next 4 years will be a really strong indicator for sort of which side of those scales should tip a little heavier. Because you're right that his language about vaccines there really could go either way. And I don't know what to make of it at this point.
Well,
I'm optimistic.
And to your point, which I agree with that, and this is, I think, a problem in the bigger research, truth, conspiracy culture that we like to fill. And this is one thing that the mainstream criticism is absolutely true, that when there's ignorance or lack of information, we will fill it with conspiracies, whether rightfully or wrongfully. We'll find ways to, and that's something that I try to keep my own self in check, but also to go back just for a moment about what we were discussing. And you acknowledged, like, the the Epstein network. We know that RFK did have some connection to Maxwell, and it hasn't been fully explored. There's definitely was some relationship there. I'll also throw out, and again, I'm not saying that there's anything that I can conclusively prove, but I feel like there's definitely fire there related to RFK's ex-wife and her suicide. And I'm sure you've looked into it, like the quick burial of her and just all kinds of weird family stuff there. And like I mentioned, his past, that, and then also even just family in general, that the Kennedys have been connected to mafia for a couple generations now.
Rose.
Yeah, exactly. So there's definitely, I don't think, beyond the realm of possibility for us to think that he could be being manipulated by the same forces that we point to in other areas. I don't think it's necessarily that hard to imagine that being true.
Yep.
One other one I want to point to real quick before we get to Israel is this one. And this, I don't really have much to say other than I saw the headline go by. I haven't seen anybody else discuss it. I don't know the full details, but this was reported by Stat News, which is like a medical website, as well as others, on February 28th. And it said RFK Jr. moves to eliminate public comment on HHS decisions. In a note to the Federal Register, the health agency says public participation is not needed in many of their decisions. And the article is behind a paywall, but we can drop it into archive if anybody. I'll share this for anybody who wants to check it out. But this was posted on the Federal Register, which is basically the federal government's website for contracts and different kind of public changes that none of us pay attention to or ever see.
Yeah,
but
good catch.
On March 3rd, the HHS published this call for change, which, according to Alex Howard of the Digital Democracy Project, an open government advocate, said this is a direct attack on the idea that HHS should have to tell the public everything that it's doing. And so from what I could understand, though, and again, like if I've got it wrong or if they've got it wrong, but I will say that this website's usually pretty on point with medical news, that they were changing some old rule that had been established, I want to say in the 70s, that started to require government agencies like HHS to make sure the public had an opportunity to comment, and that they were, at least from what it seems like, this move they were filing was to eliminate that and to make it where the public would have less opportunity to comment.
That is complicated, where it's like without context, it'd be so easy for me to misjudge what this means. But it on its face value, it appears to be a stark departure from the policies for the people sort of an ethos that Maha came in with, where they were literally petitioning the people for ideas for what should they do. I could see this being something where this is eliminating the opportunity for big pharma to sort of filibuster and to sort of impair their ability to act, but I don't have the context to know if that's what's going on at all. That would require a dig for sure.
Like I said, I'm not an expert on it yet either, but I did share it on some of the channels here for those who want to check it out, or just look up the headline. Again, it's RFK Jr. moves to eliminate public comment on HHS decisions. But I want to jump now to a topic we've covered already a little bit, which is, and it's the big one that we both do agree on, and this is Israel. That, the Trump administration is continuing to fund Israel and give them massive weapons packages, as we expected. I don't think anybody's surprised. Just like the latest news from today, there's been another Israeli strike killing 65 people. I posted this earlier. There's 2 journalists that have been killed. And unfortunately, this is really graphic video of them dead. This was, I think, up to 173 journalists that have been killed just since October 7th, 2023, not, talking in the longer, broader conflict. Yeah. And then you kind of already touched on this earlier. We've got the massive airstrikes on Yemen. Trump, going in that direction, which I did share with you that I believe that something like this was going to happen because of JD Vance and others who, despite talk of Trump being a pro-peace president, have been saying that they want war with Iran. And this is basically a proxy war with Iran because they claim that the Houthis are being funded by Iran. And then, I'll just share my thoughts and then toss it to you. But as far as people, I've seen a lot of pushback, people saying, well, you know what? They've been attacking the ships over there, so we got to hit them hard. And first of all, it's like, I'm not condoning anybody being attacked or any American soldiers or whatever, but again, learn the context, learn the history, and just a few points on that. For one, Trump and Obama before him have been involved in starving the Yemenis by supporting Saudi Arabia's war against the Yemenis, which is the poorest country in the region. And so during Trump's first administration, he was giving them huge weapons packages towards the Saudis to help them with this. And I even found this article right here from the end of his term, April 2019. Trump vetoes measure to end U.S. involvement in Yemen war, where you actually got a bipartisan group of lawmakers willing to say, hey, maybe we need to actually follow and have a declaration of war, because there hasn't been a declaration of war since World War II. All the presidents just keep dropping bombs. And
Yep.
it actually did pass. And this was going to be like an effort to sort of limit the U.S. involvement in the Saudi-Yemeni conflict. It's been called a humanitarian crisis for years now. And Trump vetoed that effort to stop that. And then, of course, now he's back in office, and the Houthis are allegedly attacking Israeli ships. They've claimed, now again, take their word for whatever you want, but they've claimed the reason that the attacks began is because Israel continues to block aid into Palestine. And so that this is a response to that. And so I'm not saying that justifies anything necessarily, but I do think it's not just them coming out of nowhere. And again, if you understand the context of the U.S. and Saudi attack on the Yemeni people, then you can kind of see a bit of the bigger picture. But what do you think about this, and just the idea that Trump is pro-peace candidate still? I mean, obviously there's still stuff going on in Ukraine as well.
Yeah, I think this is the greatest failure of the Trump presidency so far in its totality. And I think that article you brought up about Trump's veto of the declaration of war piece there was great. I did not know about that. And that's a very subtle and sly way for him to sort of hold on to being the pro-peace president if you don't have to be declaring war when you're, engaging in warfare, which is the US's MO for decades and decades now. But aside from just any one instance of this, it's just atrocious how quickly Trump, and it's not that all of Trump's cabinet, they weren't all kind of railing. I mean, really, it was more the Trump supporters that were all about how Trump has been all pro-peace and he's never started any wars, which, I mean, I would argue that he was better than Biden at not starting wars, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he actually is better than Biden. That might just mean that he inhabited a time in the greater political machinations of global politics where his job was not to start wars like that. And yeah, I think that the Trump presidency's treatment of the Middle East is the most atrocious piece of the entire Trump presidency so far. And it goes further than what you even mentioned too, where all those things are happening in Yemen, and what's happened in Syria is absolutely barbaric. But beyond that, Trump came out on Truth Social and explicitly said that any retaliation by the Houthis will be seen as a direct act of war by Iran, which A, is retarded on its face, but B, when you think about the actual subtext to that, that is an open invitation to anyone that likes to do false flags to shoot a rocket at any of those ships and say it was the Houthis, and suddenly, bam, you have war with Iran. And we all know what countries want war with Iran. And so it's on multiple, that's 5D chess of retardery, because it's a horrible idea on its surface, and it's a horrible idea below the surface too. So when he made that statement, I was super not jazzed. And most of my hopes for Trump having any sort of positive impact on the Middle East are fading rather rapidly. And I don't feel any way around that right now.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the truth. I think it was on Truth Social. We posted that. And by the way, I saw one of the comments there, guys. I'm just pulling up links real quick. You don't have to trust the sources. You can go look up these people's own statements.
We all know these sources are bullshit. You learn a lot about the information within based on who's reporting on it, and how they report it, right? You get also is the spin.
And I think also, and this is another area that I think our movement, so to speak, could improve, is that, look, the Associated Press, Reuters, NPR, they don't literally just promote all fake news. That's not how it works. That's not how corporate media works. They mix truth with lies. So if there's an article that says Trump said something, sure, read it and look. And usually there's a direct quote from Trump, and you can go do the search if you actually have the time and you want to actually, get beyond just saying, oh, that's AP, they're trash, and look it up, and you can find Trump saying this in his own words. So just like what Ian was saying here, this is what Trump wrote on Truth Social. Now, if you don't like NPR, you might look at the headline and say, oh, that's fake news. But Trump himself said every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran, and Iran will be held responsible and suffer the consequences, and those consequences will be dire. Yeah, that's Trump's words, And I think I kind of was warning that I think that we were going to go in this direction. A lot of people thought in Trump's first term it was just because John Bolton, he got rid of John Bolton, everything's fine. But I think I told you during our first conversation back prior to the election that it was JD Vance that was saying, if we're going to go after Iran, we need to hit him, and we need to hit him hard. Like, he was already kind of ramping up that whole picture. So for me, it's not too surprising to see that now we're seeing this play right into that narrative, which does make me skeptical of the whole Houthi attacks in the first place, right? Because it's not that hard, like you said, false flags and everything else, to just step right into this. So I hope that this isn't a situation, because I remember a lot of folks were saying, maybe this is something you even said before, I can't recall, that, well, Trump is going to bring peace to Ukraine and Russia. That seems like there's stuff going on there. It hasn't happened yet. But I was arguing, well, that could happen. But at the same time, if Israel and Iran go against each other, that's another step towards World War III that people don't want to see happen. And so we know, of course, General Wesley Clark and others have said that for decades now, plus since 9/11, they wanted to go to Syria, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, and eventually Iran. And I think that that plan is still on the table, even under a Trump administration. And then I just want to remind again that, as I said before, many people still don't know that Trump dropped more bombs than Obama during his one term, and in the first year, in fact. And then also towards the end of his term, he passed an executive order to turn off, basically get rid of the requirement for them to report on drone strikes. And so we don't really even know if Biden dropped more, or the people puppeting Biden, if he dropped more than Trump. And we won't really know how many he does the second term because of the actions he took during his first. So I still just kind of push back on the idea that he is or ever was a pro-peace candidate. Now, that doesn't mean he might be better than some of the others, but I don't think at the end of the day that's saying a whole lot.
I agree on that. I do want to put out there that and you might really disagree with this strongly, I'm not sure, but I see our job in the media right now, especially bigger and bigger platforms, and how Trump's presidency has more or less endorsed alternative media, albeit a somewhat controlled subsection of the alternative media. But I do see us as having great power to push. And so sometimes what I put out there, it's always like what I believe is true, or at least what I believe is right. But sometimes I also see it as an opportunity to push. And if Trump is riding on the rhetoric, I'm going to be the pro-peace candidate, I am very happy to use my platform to push on that rhetoric and say, yes, we love that. Be the pro-peace president. And as long as the critical piece is that if he goes back on that, we need to call him out for it, because it does nothing if we push on that and then just fall over and move the goalposts when he then starts a war. But if we make it known that we will love and respect you for this action if you take it, and we will throw that reputation away and throw that love and respect you could have had away if you break that trust. I think Trump, more so than even most presidents, is driven largely by his ego and his desire to leave a legacy. And so I see us in the alternative media as having a small amount, at least, of influence on that legacy and on telling him how his legacy is going to be lived. And so I sort of take this intentional angle of like, I am more willing to champion the good promises, in the sense that we will love that, but also understanding that, like, it's not like if you fail to deliver on that, it's not like we're just going to ride this fucking bandwagon forever and pretend like nothing ever happened. Just like people that were all for the Iraq war and never fucking woke up to the fact that they pushed this evil lie. That's condemnable. But I have at least a little bit of, will for people that genuinely make a mistake and then realize like, oh, I just pushed the wrong shit, which is not what I'm saying here. I'm saying that, like with Maha, for example, I am all for being super stoked on Kennedy, super stoked on Maha. Yes, we believe in this. Yes, we believe in this. Give you the momentum, dude. But if you don't deliver on it, then like, I mean, either way, I see we kind of wound up where we started. And I do want to walk back a little for the Trump side of this conversation, that though we're shitting on Trump a lot right now, we're going over a lot of the negatives, I do feel very good still about my vote for Trump, in the sense that had we and I'd be really curious for your take on this specifically. Up until Trump's election, I feel quite confident that all of the presidents in my lifetime were directly acting on behalf of this shadow government, that most of them were even groomed throughout their entire political career for this shadow government, and enacted direct shadow government policies throughout their entire career, up to Biden being literally not even there, like maybe even dead. We don't know. Or at least I don't know. And And so Trump, I still am of the belief that Trump does not, in my mind, seem to be acting directly on behalf of the shadow government, but rather seems to be acting as a businessman that grew up around the shadow government, that is easily swayed by wealth and money, easily swayed by deal making, easily swayed by big words and sexy big numbers like Larry Ellison with like his big talk of fucking AI bullshit. Which often makes it so that Trump is acting on behalf of them, but I don't see him as aligning directly with him. And a lot of the actions he's taken, like dismantling USAID, like going after like Doge, and just dismantling all these sort of like integrated parts of our government that are like objectively tools for this deep state or shadow government. He's doing a lot of things that do not benefit the shadow government just on face value. But then he's also being manipulated into doing other things, or he's willingly doing other things that are on their behalf. And so what I'm saying is that I'd still rather be in the media environment post-Trump as opposed to a Kamala media environment. Because I can't even imagine where we would be if Kamala was our president right now. But I'd be really curious for your take on that whole perspective, because I think we disagree on this, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I think it's totally bullshit, man. Like not against you, just I can't buy that. I think it's respectfully, I think it's naive to think that with all of Trump's connections that he's not. I think, well, for one, you're correct that he's driven by ego. I think that's true, and that's a great way to manipulate a person. A person who is driven by ego, as much as people want to give Trump credit for like he's the Teflon Don who doesn't bow down to anybody and everybody bows down to him. And sure, I'll give him credit in certain areas of posturing that way. But we sure do see him bow down to Israel. I think it's debatable who's in charge, whether it's Elon or him. Obviously, the Adelsons. I want to talk about Peter Thiel in a little bit and Doge.
Yeah,
so I'm going to hold my thoughts on that in just for a couple minutes. But in general, that perspective, I do have an immense difficulty trying to believe that. Now, that doesn't mean that that we're not in some like new territory and haven't been with Trump. I believe like, without being able to prove all the pieces, but I've been saying this since he first popped on the scene in 2016, that Trump is the New World Order, deep state, shadow government's literal Trump card. I don't think that is like, a mistake, that phrase even exists. I think that he is here for this reason, to serve this purpose, to sort of, astroturf or collect the real freedom, truth, conservative, libertarian-ish movement and bring a bunch of people in there. Because despite you having a more nuanced take even though I do disagree with what you just said, your take is still more nuanced than the Trump supporters who everything that we just talked about prior to this, you're willing to say, yeah, that doesn't look that good. They're going to just keep saying, well, no, who cares? There are absolutely cultish Trump members. I know that you see them out there as well. And I think it's worth, just pointing that out, that they're definitely, and I think in a very dangerous way, not to say that the other side doesn't have their own cults. Obama was probably the biggest left-wing Democrat cult we saw. I don't think Biden really had that same kind of thing. It was more of like a motivation by hatred of Trump.
Plug your ears and pretend it's not this bad.
Yeah, just like, okay, well, it's at least it's not Trump, but that's kind of the whole thing. I even see in the comments here just saying like, imagine if Kamala had won. And I think it's just such a low level of thinking, not to say that this is the position you're taking, but when if somebody criticizes Trump and the only response somebody has is, it isn't like to say, well, let's debate this point about Israel or about Maha or about the vaccines or about what have you. It's just to say, at least it's not Kamala. Like, and that I think was by design. This is how this system, how the pyramid of power operates, that they create kind of enemies to set up only to knock them down, So for the last couple of years, it's been like, and there has been some truth that the left is going hardcore into transgenderism and open borders and DEI and all this stuff. And so you build that up, and then all Trump has to do is come in and kind of be the opposite of it. Great. Okay. He did some executive orders about transgender sports and, men and women's sports. And I know a lot of people celebrated it. I think that's a common sense thing. But that also is very easy. It doesn't really require much political capital to do that, in the same way that freeing Ross Ulbricht, which is something I celebrate and have fought for since the day Ross was locked up. I'm grateful that happened. I'm so grateful every time I see Ross posting on Twitter, like at the Grand Canyon and at the beach and stuff like that. Trump had a role in that. But I also think, again, it's not a move that cost him a lot of effort or time or money or anything like that. But then I look at things like, just one example, giving the Panama Canal or helping, supporting Panama Canal being taken by Larry Fink and BlackRock. And I see the Trump supporters, well, it's better that we have it, not China. And that's kind of a whole other side conversation about collectivism and people identifying with the country or the politicians like we did that. Well, I didn't bomb anybody. I'm not going to necessarily benefit if the US government allows BlackRock to bring in, take control of a couple ports in the Panama Canal. But people really identify with Trump, so they deflect any negative criticisms, and then something they see as positive, they sort of talk about it, or maybe even believe that they're benefiting in some way, even if it's not necessarily inherently true. So I just think that the control grid has set up these clear false binaries, and Trump represents something new, like where you've got a lot of the movement. I mean, I know you've been on InfoWars a lot recently. I shared today on my Twitter a clip from myself on InfoWars back in 2012. I was on there in 2011, 2012, 2013, right around the time I started talking about Trump and being critical of him. The InfoWars invites stopped coming. And as you know, a lot of people have left InfoWars over the years because of things that they saw with Alex, David Knight, Aaron and Melissa Dykes, Kurt Nimmo, so many others who I think are principal people who just kind of got sick of what they were seeing as like a blind spot in the InfoWars crew. To me, that's emblematic of not only a section of independent media, I'll call it mainstream alternative media, as Ike calls it, but also just some of the audience that no matter what, they're just going to stand by their man. They're going to stand by him. And I think that's really dangerous. I know that's not what you're doing exactly, but I definitely don't think that Trump is like a renegade, just confusing all these people, and they just have no idea what's happening, and they're just trying to keep up with his rapid fire pace. Sure, USAID revealed some things, but as I'll share my thoughts in a little bit when we get to technocracy, because I do want to talk about these deportations first. I think it's really an effort to dismantle and take apart pieces of the government that, coming from a libertarian background, on one hand, I might celebrate if I didn't also have these concerns about it being replaced with AI governance and technocracy and these sort of things. So I think it looks good at the moment, and it allows somebody to say, "What, Derek? You want the government to stay big? You don't support government being reduced or exposing these things?" And it's not that I don't. It's just that I don't believe that is the end. I don't think we've seen the end of where it's headed.
Can I ask a clarifying question? I'm curious of your take on this. If supposing Kamala had won, do you think that we would even be able to have this conversation right now? Do you think that X would still exist? And do you think that things like the word vaccine would still be censored? And do you think that, where do you think that censorship would have gone in a Kamala presidency?
I mean, obviously,
because it's
obviously I don't know 100%, but yes, I think we would be able to have this conversation. I think that is another red herring that was built up of it's about to be full on communism and censorship everywhere. Yeah. During the Biden administration, obviously related to COVID, they were working with, everybody knows the Twitter files and different things of social media pressure and things of that sort. That seems to have abated, at least for the moment. But I mean, I guess we'll see where things go. Now it seems though you can't really talk about Israel.
Yeah.
Now it's Israel.
I feel like it seems to me from the media space, from being on all the different apps, it feels to me like we were headed in the direction of more and more and more and more censorship, and that this job, these platforms, because if they came after Elon and came after X, we would be down from 40,000-50,000 viewers right now. We would probably be on a BitChute or a Rumble with 3,000 or 4,000 viewers. And I think that I worry that at the direction that the left was going, if the left had continued to be in power, that I didn't see any slowing up of those principles and those sort of, because all the businesses would have known that it was open season for censorship. They all would have known it was open season for more of this leftist ideology. And that was a big factor in my decision to vote Trump, and in my continued decision to feel like I feel good about doing our job in this media environment, even though Israel is the glaring exception to that.
I just think it's easy to kind of theorize about that, and we'll never know. And my argument essentially is that was never intended to happen. That Kamala Harris had no popularity, and it's almost and I think you would probably agree with this too, that if you wanted to, teach a course on how to destroy your own race, they did it. They did a master course in it, right?
Yeah,
and pissed off everybody they could. It did not appear like they wanted to win. And in fact, when there was probably better candidates who may have actually been able to go against Trump, including RFK, then you could have gone that route. So I don't think that the powers that manipulate the DNC and the RNC wanted there to be a viable candidate to Trump. And again, I think they wanted things to look as crazy as possible on the left, so that the average American, even if you're not a hardcore Trump or MAGA conservative, you're just wow, men and women's sports, I don't know, this kind of seems crazy. And just the natural, because I think I said this to you before, I have a brother-in-law, working class dude who maybe watches Fox News every now and then, but generally doesn't pay much attention, might watch one of my videos, but he's definitely more minded towards Trump because he's like, man, these leftists with their radical this and that, right? Like, so people looked at that and it just seemed like Trump was the obvious alternative. Now, as far as, you know, you mentioned like, well, we'd be on BitChute and Rumble, whatever else. I actually think that would be better. Like right now I'm streaming to Odyssey, I'm streaming to alternative platforms. If we could get the people off of the mainstream bigger platforms, this is another dialogue, but still it's part of the solution, then we wouldn't be dependent on these big tech platforms. If people would finally, and I don't mean Rumble, because personally I'm not a big supporter of Rumble and their Peter Thiel financing. I think that BitChute, Odyssey, there's others out there are better alternatives. The point is, I think even if that had increased, let's say that your scenario is accurate and Kamala won, and so censorship increases or just continues the way it was, we would continue to find ways to reach people. That's the way it was during COVID. Even, you know, my YouTube channel, which for some reason they gave me back, was deleted during COVID. But I started streaming elsewhere and those platforms grew, right? And I started focusing on, hey, sign up for my email list. And I think we're going to be more creative and find ways to reach people. I don't think that Elon saved free speech. I don't think that Elon saved the internet or anything like that. You know that there's censorship on X, just like I do, that there's still censorship taking place. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not better under Elon's hands as opposed to the previous owners or whatever. But generally speaking, I think it is a red herring, this kind of idea that the world was going to end if Kamala won, because as I said to you before, and as I think has been proven correctly, they were both funded by different members of the steering committee of the Bilderberg group, both funded by Zionists, both funded by technocrats. And in the end, those are the groups that seem to be winning, you know, despite which president is in there.
I mean, those are the shadow government. Those are the groups. Those are what the shadow government has evolved into. And you bring up a really important point in your sort of larger perspective about Trump being their guy. And this is a fear that I have, and this is a fear that I've always had, and I've chosen to choose optimism and hope that he's not, but also I'm always looking for evidence that he is, because you're right, that is how the pendulum swings. They do intentionally build up a movement in this direction and then use that momentum to swing you over to their guy in this direction. After George Bush, they needed to swing us to Obama. And so you're absolutely right in that sort of like that tension push pull that they naturally orchestrate. I do think that there's an element that people, especially in sort of the more like I would just say like your crowd in this like sort of more central libertarian like exit and build crowd, a lot of really hardcore journalists, like I'm complimenting the crowd. There is but this is a criticism, is that not you, because you're actually highly informed about this stuff, but a lot of people get this in this wormhole of the deep state and the intelligence agencies are so damn good at their jobs, they control everything. And to me, that doesn't square with my read of history. In like when you read the history, exactly. When you read the history of the CIA, it's like they fucking sucked at their jobs for a huge amount of their time on this planet. And they've had some really, really fucking good operators at certain times. Like H.W. Bush was one of their best, I would argue. Helms was really good at his job, and those guys got away pretty much scot clean with all the horrible things that they did during their time. But it would be a departure from the norm for the intelligence agencies and for like this greater deep state to be so good at what they're doing to orchestrate the Trump presidency, like from them, like literally someone shooting him in the ear to all of the sort of like ways that they would have built up this social movement for him to just like be knocking it down. Like that would be a masterclass in global control. And I'm not saying that's not possible. I'm just saying that that would be scary impressive how good they would be at it right now. And it brings up this important point that these technocrats and the current global elite are highly competent people. And so that's like, that is the reasoning why I do give your perspective there a certain amount of credence, and I do consider it carefully every day, because like Peter Thiel is fucking good at his job, and he is really subversive and intelligent and highly effective at what he's done so far. And by all impressions, what he intends to continue to do well into the future. And so I am concerned about that. I don't necessarily, I do not believe that is what's going on. Like I'm maybe at like 20% chance that that's what's going on, 10 to 20% chance, but I worry about it for sure.
Yeah. So I'll just say that, and we'll get back to going over some of the Trump's first 60 days here. Thanks to everybody who is tuned in. I also agree with you. I'm not one of the people that believe everything is fake, like literally every single aspect. Now, I do think we know false flags exist. We know, false media, et cetera. Like there's reasons people go down that rabbit hole. I think some people take it too far, like pretty much, any topic, there's always going to be the extremists in that area of research. But I also do think that, you know, a deep state, a shadow government capable of pulling off 9/11 could fake almost anything and could
Very well
pull
said,
off
sir.
like some, and because I don't trust the
Very well said.
assassination attempts. I can't say I can tell you frame by frame what happened exactly. There's some weird things like, why did the Secret Service agent start shooing people away right before the bullet, came from behind Trump? I don't know if you've seen that angle. There's like one of the Secret
Yeah, I
Service
have
guys.
no idea what happened that day.
There's some weird stuff going on. I don't trust it, right? And then and I know you were just on Rogan, but a lot of us out here have suspicions about him as well, and his relation to Jones, other things. But even beyond that, when Trump went on Rogan, he's like, "Oh yeah, I got a little scar here." Like, I don't know. I wasn't very convinced.
I didn't see any fucking scar, to be honest.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I don't know. I'm skeptical of the whole thing, and I do think without gifting the the predator class, the pyramid, omniscient, omnipotent powers or anything like that, they still are very capable. Yes,
quick
as far as we know, they're
clarifier.
humans, and they make mistakes, but I do think they're much more coordinated than we give them credit for.
Yeah. I agree on that. I just want to quickly clarify that, and maybe I'm missing something here, but in my mind, the only way that a bullet did not pass by Trump's ear and probably like graze and burst like blood vessels in his ear, I don't think it actually hit his ear. But the only other way that I can understand what happened that we saw was, God damn it, it just froze my camera.
I can hear you still.
Yeah, but the only other way that could have happened is he must have had a blood capsule in his hand and smashed it on his ear. Do you agree?
Which he might have learned while he was at WWE. Like, I know it sounds silly, but his experience in the WWE, the razor blades and the thing, I don't know. I think it's totally possible. I think it's totally possible. Yep. And that doesn't mean because
that is a low possibility, but you're right. It is possible.
And people will say, okay, but what about the people that died? Look, these psychopaths kill people, even when things are staged or fake or coordinated. Doesn't mean people don't die. That's one thing I think people go too far. Like, nobody died. I'm like, these people don't give a damn about killing children, killing anybody. Definitely. So you think they wouldn't stage something? And again, I don't know the details of how that would happen. I just know my spidey sense went off and is like, this
9/11 happened. So yeah. I don't agree with you on that. I'm of the belief that a bullet really did pass by his ear, but I do agree that it is possible, 100% possible. I mean, at this point, a lot of things are possible. So
exactly. All right. Well, let's continue on in the interest of time. I want to jump into some of this discussion, and this might be an area where we also don't agree. Maybe not. Maybe, I don't know. I haven't seen you post much about this.
I think it's an area where I don't have a formed opinion yet because it's so complicated.
Okay. Well, I just got 2 or 3 things on it, and then I'd love to get your take on it, right? Because I've been taking a lot of shit for asking people to maybe just preserve their humanity with everything going on. Just to establish a couple of facts, I think we both think that illegal immigration that results in people being killed, gang members, criminals being released off, with no bond, no bail, et cetera, all those kind of policies, which were mostly done by progressive DAs, many of whom had funding from various George Soros organizations, ready to admit that happened in Houston, where I'm originally from. And there was a famous case, I can't remember the young girl's name, but last year a young girl killed, and it was by a legal immigrant who had a record, and they let him out, and he went out and murdered somebody, right? I think we all are against those sort of things. Again, I would argue, just to preface this, that the sort of build up the last couple of years with the immigration issue, it's the typical problem reaction solution where a problem is either created or allowed to fester to the point that the public reacts like, please save us, save us, save us. And Trump's like, we're going to have the biggest military deportation operation ever. We're going to build, camps for them, et cetera, even house people in Guantanamo, stuff like that. And so a lot of people have been saying, this is what I voted for. I have no problem for it. This is 100% what I voted for, right? But I wanted just to bring up a couple of points. My main argument here is not to say, again, if somebody has come illegally, which I have my own anarchist opinions about that I'll set aside just for the sake of this conversation. If somebody broke the law and they came illegally, okay, deport them if that's the case, right? My argument has been deport them to their home country when possible. Many of the concerns have been around this gang from this violent gang, which is, actual violent gang. Yeah, from Venezuela. And Venezuela currently doesn't have friendly relations with the U.S. This is another area where I would say people need to look in the context, because why is that? Well, because during Trump's administration, the first time, they were trying to overthrow Maduro, who's no hero, no good guy himself, but they were basically trying to coup him, install Juan Guaido into there. And for anybody who remembers that going on. So since that, he's basically said, we don't have friendly relations. We're not going to take our own people back. Now that sense changed just in the last 24 hours. Now Venezuela's saying they're going to start taking their people back. But because of that, all the people who were rounded up, whether they were proven to be gang members or not, which as I'm going to show you, some of them have not been proven to be gang members, were deported to this violent prison, and one of the biggest, craziest prisons in El Salvador. El Salvador, of course, is celebrated by a lot of MAGA because they cleaned up their country. They went from being one of the most violent countries in the world to now being one of the more safe. And even according to Bukele, the president, and their own administration, they say that up to 8,000 innocent people were rounded up during that process of cleaning up things. And it's just kind of like, well, collateral damage. Sooner or later, they're going to make their way out. I think if either one of us were that collateral damage, we probably wouldn't find that to be satisfactory. And so now I'm seeing the same thing happen with this whole deportation thing, where there are people, I'm going to show an example here in a moment, that have been caught up in this and who are not proven to be gang members. Surely there are some gang members, and I've seen some of the DOJ press releases going out, murderers, things like that. Get them out. I'm totally down for that, right? Still doesn't make sense to send them to El Salvador, send them back to Venezuela now that Venezuela is really willing to take them. But there are absolutely people who were just immigrants who may have crossed the line on the map illegally, but weren't criminals and had no criminal record, and are now, their families are only finding them by watching this fucking propaganda video that Bukele put out, where they're dragging these people in chains and saying, look, we caught all these violent gang members. We brought them from the US. They shaved their heads. There's a really interesting article out there, a couple of them talking about families who said, like, I got a call from one of my family members. He said, hey, I've been caught by ICE. They're taking me away, assuming they were going to be going home soon. And then the next thing, the family sees them in this propaganda video on the internet. And so I have huge problems with that, like in terms of civil liberties, in terms of the precedent that it's setting. This is what I was talking about from Drop Site News. Venezuelan professional goalkeeper deported to El Salvador prison, stunning family back home. And it's a kind of a long story, but this guy would basically left Venezuela, where he's originally from, because he was actually tortured by the Maduro government during some protest he was involved in. He eventually comes to the US under an asylum claim, and he had an appointment in April to be going to, figure out his situation. So he wasn't just here hanging out illegally, trying to sneak by. He had an appointment for April 17th, 2025, coming up soon. And then next thing you know, he's taken to this prison here. Crazy stuff, man. And this is just one of many examples. And I think there's a lot of conservatives who are, again, saying, this is what I voted for. I'll give you one more here. This is Georgetown professor Badar Khan Suri, which, again, is not a black and white situation. His wife, her father worked for Hamas at one point, like a decade or more ago. She had made some trips there, but himself had done nothing. It's just sort of like they're targeting him because of who his wife was, and maybe because he posted online saying that he didn't believe Israel's version of events on October 7th, which both of us have also said as well. So there's these kind of situations, and this reminds me of post 9/11. All this kind of panic. We need to round people up. For those who weren't around or paying attention, I was only 17. There was, rendition. They're kidnapping people, taking people to black sites. Many of those people were held in prisons, never charged with a crime, later released. They're still suing the government. Those lawsuits are still going on. So yeah, and I'll share this other one in a moment. But what's your general thought on just like how things are taken off? I know you said you're not super informed on this part, but just the dangers of the precedents that might be being set by this action.
No, I agree with you. I thought you were going to go a different direction in the judges stuff. I agree with you that it's atrocious when those sort of like mistakes happen, theoretically mistakes. And my understanding is actually some of them, like even more so, like some of them are straight up like had green cards. I saw one article going around of a guy that like legitimately had a green card and was clearly not a gang member. And I would have even less sort of disquiet about that if we had a stronger actual like response at the border. But actually, like deportations on large are down from during the last 4 years, as far as I'm aware. And they have secured the border, and that the people coming to the border has largely stopped. But I was honestly expecting a lot more effective action as far as illegal immigration and actual like Tren de Aragua is almost like the lower hanging fruit in my mind. I'm more concerned about possible like legitimate terrorist cells from not just from Middle Eastern countries, but from China and like from all these different nations around the world, where I'm concerned that they're getting caught up in like the scapegoating of this one gang, and concerned that they're sort of playing to the optics far more than playing to the actual effectiveness of the operation. And So I have mixed feelings in that child trafficking and the cartels and the greater human trafficking international network, I think their pocketbooks are probably hurting significantly from the Trump presidency shutting the border down like they did. But I actually don't feel like we've gotten what we were promised on border and immigration and deportation at all. And it's a bummer that not only have we not gotten what we were promised in that regard, but we've also gotten all these mistakes and miscarriages of justice along the way. It's like, that's like kind of a double stand in my book.
Yeah. And so I mean, I guess on your end, you wish there was more action, but maybe better action, not necessarily what we're seeing here. And
Yeah.
you mentioned
you right now a lot. Am I glitching out on you?
You're coming through for me, but I'm not sure if you tap your mic real quick. I think it might have switched to whenever you.
I think that you're glitching a little bit, and I was just trying to make sure it was not my internet, because I could try changing internets. I think I'm doing okay.
Okay, I seem like I'm fine on mine.
It switched to my computer microphone. There we go. Cool.
Yeah, I think so. Cool.
Yeah, better.
There you go. Cool. All right.
No, I think we're pretty much in agreement about what you just brought up, honestly.
So here's the one, because you mentioned the courts. I did want to mention the court thing just briefly, and I'm not.
Yeah, because it's complicated.
I'm not a constitutional expert. I will say today, I was listening, for those who don't know, just today as we're recording, there was the Supreme Court was hearing these cases. And so there was court cases were going on. You could hear the audio. I was listening to the audio for a couple hours about the government's case and then the plaintiffs who are being represented. And essentially what's coming down to, for those who haven't been keeping up, there was a judge that said, hey, Trump needs to stop these deportations. Trump and his team argued, well, the planes were already in the air. Later, the court evidence shows that no, they hadn't even left yet. But then the general argument from Trump and Musk and others is that, well, I don't need to obey the courts, which I think sets a pretty bad precedent. But then there's all kinds of different opinions on the constitutional and the separation of powers and who's in the right. So I'm not claiming to speak as an expert on that. But I did want to just share this one comment here from the National Review, which again, I'm not a supporter of wholly either, but I think this writer here did a great job. So it's called Trump Admin Defying Judge Over Hearing About Its Earlier Defiance. And I just wanted to read one section here where he gives a pretty good, I think, solid opinion. Where did it go? Okay, he said, it should go without saying that at the Justice Department, the rule of the road is that in the absence of true emergency, the government complies with judicial orders, even if those orders are patently lawless, until it can get them reversed, either by issuing judge or a higher court. It's all right to complain bitterly about court orders, but they are not to be ignored, much less knowingly flouted. And that, I think, is more of a true conservative position, that of like saying, okay, even if you think that the courts are wrong because you're like, these are radical Democrat activist judges, as if the right doesn't have their own activist judges, that even if that's the case, if we're trying to maintain, because right now a lot of the left and even just the mainstream, and I think there's some truth to this, is saying Trump is kind of inching the U.S. closer to a constitutional crisis with this sort of mentality. I think there's some truth to that. I think if you're left, right, center, whatever, none of us want that. I don't want a civil war. I don't want things to really go in that direction. And people who think that they're Rambo on the internet, I think will have a much different view of civil war and violence once it actually happens. And so this argument is basically saying, like, look, even if the law is wrong, you don't just ignore that because of the precedent that it sets. You go fight it in court. And there was no emergency where, they already had these people detained. They could have just held them and said, okay, let's wait till the courts tell us if this is legit or not. And then, just keep them detained in the meantime. And then one other section, and I'll toss it back to you. He said here, and I think this is kind of an accurate assessment. He says, politically, the president knows that even if there are legal problems with the Alien Enemy Act theory, which, by the way, the Alien Enemy Act is the same act that they used to round up Japanese and other folks during World War II. Even if he knows that there are legal problems with the Alien Enemy Act theory, a large percentage of the country is outraged by collapse of border security, rampant illegal immigration, and gang crime. That's why Trump was elected, and he knows it. The administration reasonably thus calculates that the deportations will not only be popular, but will make him more popular if they are portrayed as another instance of Democrat and Democrat-appointed judges siding with gang members over Americans. And I think that's accurate, that there might be some of that playing into their stance, that they know, even if they're like, hey, we might be kind of on shaky legal territory here, but we can play it that, like, look, the radical left judges are just trying to stop my agenda. Even if in the bigger picture, stepping back objectively, like, it's not good if the left or the right do that. I don't think either one of them kind of taking this position of like, we can just ignore the courts outright is a wise move. And I also think, like I already expressed, the sort of way that these deportations are being carried out is kind of haphazard, and it's resulting, as I think we can probably expect from any major government action like this, in innocent people being caught up in the mix.
Yeah, no, I agree about I mean, it's sad. I think that you're right that writer put it particularly well, that they see that they can get away with this because of the portrayal of the left and the judges and all this. But I share your concern that, like, though I am sympathetic to the concept that our government has been infiltrated by almost like radical kind of socialist kind of tendencies and subversive stacking of courts in multiple directions, I worry about setting the precedent that the executive branch can just overrun the other two branches of government like that. And we've been seeing that play out presidency after presidency, with presidents using executive orders in place of Congress actually enacting anything, which is not necessarily a condemnation of anyone. It's like a condemnation of how broken our system of government is at this point and how purchased our Congress is. Because without a functioning Congress, when everyone in Congress is purchased, that kind of forces the president to rely on executive action. But then the president starts relying on executive action so much that then judges try to rein them in, and you start to get this like downward spiral away from a constitutional republic and towards the Lord knows what. And I share your concern. In this instance, it's almost like a silly, petty place for this to even be a concern, because you're right, they are already detained and it's not an emergency. It's not a super big threat. It feels more like a PR move to me than anything else. But again, it's extremely complicated, and I'm no lawyer, and so that's a good area where like those are my personal opinions, but I also don't try to like make a bunch of content about it because it is so far from my area of expertise that I just try to watch and learn as much as I can in those regards, because I have a lot to learn in terms of those deeper kind of political and legal machinations.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. That's what I was saying. I'm definitely not an expert on it. I've just been trying to dive deep and keep up with some of the things. And
Yeah.
I've also been following some of the lawyers who are representing these plaintiffs. They're on Twitter and they're posting some of the court transcripts showing that like the government hasn't proven many of these people even have a criminal record. They have, other than saying the crime of illegal immigration, they haven't actually committed crime. They haven't provided evidence. There's been some shaky things where like one person had a tattoo of obviously a logo of a soccer team, and you can find the logo and you can look at his tattoo. It's very clear. They have it in the court records, but they said, no, that's the crown and that's related to the gangs and this and that, just different things that seem like they're just taking that opportunity they have and they're going to expand it. And I worry that in the bigger picture, it's that old saying of, right, like first they came for the illegal immigrants and I didn't say anything because screw them, right? Then they came for this person, and eventually like these things will be expanded. Like the government, that is all the government knows how to do, is to expand. And I don't think Trump is showing any signs of shrinking the government despite Doge, which we'll talk about in a moment. I don't think that these sort of areas, war, the Zionism, et cetera, are going to be shrunk in any kind of substantial way where we should expect like, okay, this power is going to stop. And even if you're not somebody like myself who has concerns about how Trump will use it, or if you are, even if, let's say Trump does his 4 years and he leaves and he never becomes the next president, exactly, it could go back to the other side or somebody else waiting in the wings, or JD Vance, or whatever the case may be. It sets that precedent, and it's not a good thing, because you're right, this didn't start with Trump, like the expansion of executive power. It's been going on, right? And I've seen some of those responses. Well, why weren't you complaining when Biden or Obama did this? Like, well, I was, but also is that where our level of discourse is at? Well, the other side did it too, so we're going to do it. It's just so childish to me. It's
the right is falling into that a fair bit these days. I mean, we all do some. You don't very much. I do more than you. I would clarify really quickly, though, that I do support deporting illegal immigrants just for being illegal immigrants. But that's, we don't need to debate into that. I don't support making up crimes that people have not committed. I would be much more in support of them just being like, he's an illegal immigrant, send him back. Let him come in the real way. But
I'm with you on that. All right, well, let's go. I've got two more topics. We're about an hour and a half in. Again, thanks to everybody who's tuned in. We got 33,000 plus. Let's
definitely make some room for technocracy, because it's huge. And we should talk about Vance a fair bit too.
Yeah, we'll get into, that's pretty much where we're headed now. And this, I think, will bring us to, we're going to talk about a few of these and then we're going to end up at Doge. So this one, I think we're probably on the same page about, because I saw you post about it, but it's worth exploring and going over again for everybody here. The announcement of the Stargate project. What I'm showing on screen is just my article for the Last American Vagabond. I titled Stargate, Trump partners with technocrats to promote mRNA injections, AI, and transhumanism. And you can see Sam Altman of OpenAI and Ellison of Oracle, and then the other gentleman from SoftBank. I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
And so, you know the deal on this. What is your thoughts? I mean, I know you responded to it when it happened, but where are you at? What are your thoughts on this and why it's not a good sign?
I think it's horrible in every fucking way. From the mRNA side of it to the Larry Ellison and Sam Altman side of it, I don't know as much about SoftBank, bro. Can't imagine that he's a great guy. Although people do speak really highly of him. It's like, yeah, he has a lot of money. Of course, you're going to speak highly of him. And like Larry Ellison's comments post 9/11 paint the entire picture you need to know about Larry Ellison, as far as I'm concerned. And he's never walked any of them back. As far as I'm aware, he has only continued those stances. And this is where this is one of the parts about Trump that I do not like, and I don't trust, and I don't appreciate, is that he is easily swayed by deal making, and people like these technocrats, Thiel included, though he's not in this photo, they're great at making great sounding deals, and especially to a almost 80-year-old man that doesn't really understand technology in the way you need to understand in order to make these kinds of deals and understand the ramifications of these deals. I think that Trump, even if he had the best of intentions, which I don't think he does, I appreciate a lot of him, but not the best of intentions. And that is just a perfect storm for him to be taken advantage of by people that know way more than him and have really big checkbooks and really big numbers in the sentences they're sharing with him, and can just kind of woo him into whether Trump like wants the worst case future or the best case future is kind of irrelevant, because they can, from the way I see it, they're the kind of people that can talk him into just about any future that they want, and they can make it sound like the future that he wants, because it's really easy to paint this technocratic progress as America first and as putting America at the forefront of innovation, which the unfortunate fact is that that's true. The problem is who are we putting in charge of that innovation, and who are we putting in charge of all the power that comes with those innovations? Because I think that we differ in the sense that maybe not, I don't know. I'm of the belief that, like, yeah, all this technology is coming one way or another. And what we need is not to try to stop it from coming, because that's impossible, but rather we need to try to promote people that are the most sound possible people to be at the top of those movements and to be leading those companies and to be in charge of those innovations. And this is a perfect example of like some of the least sound people I could possibly think of being in charge of these innovations.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Ellison's post 9/11 statements, because I think that is a big point, and I did include that in my article here. I'll just mention it briefly for those who don't know. Again, Ellison post 9/11, literally within months, he's writing an article saying that we need to have what did he say? We need national ID card, detailed digital maps. And he said, quote, a national security database combined with biometrics, thumbprints, handprints, iris scans, and whatever is best to use to detect people with false identities. This was January 2002. Here we are in 2025, and he's, I think, working towards that goal. And then even more recently, I found this, you might have seen the clip going around. It was in September 2024 at the financial analyst meeting. He was talking about securing schools using technology. He said, he's talking about locking schools down. He's like, we can immediately alert when someone pulls out a gun using AI cameras. And then he talks about using the cameras to monitor not only the people, but the cops. And he said something like this. He said, you don't turn it on and off. And by the way, you turn it on, you can't turn it off. You can say, I'm going to the bathroom, Oracle, I need 2 minutes to take a bathroom break, and we'll turn it off. But the truth is, we don't really turn it off. What we do is we record it so no one can see it. And then he goes on to say, police will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording, watching, recording everything. Citizens will be on their best behavior. Yeah. I mean, he's saying this out loud. Citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on. And so, I mean, these are the kind of people that are connected to this project. And I would also point out, because I did an interview with the mother, I don't know how much you saw it, but the OpenAI whistleblower who came out to the New York Times in October, and all of a sudden he ends up allegedly suicided. His family, said that they went into his house and there's definitely clear signs of a struggle. He was shot in the back of the head, according to the autopsy that they got.
He was halfway through a meal. He clearly did not commit suicide.
Yeah. And Altman, the interesting thing there is that Altman had maybe about a month around the same time of him coming out as a whistleblower, he'd been appointed as, let me just make sure I don't missay it, but a special advisor of some sort to the mayor of San Francisco, which is where the murder was happening. So
I did not know that.
Like there's a clear direct relationship between Sam Altman and the mayor of San Francisco. And for those who don't know, as far as local politics, the mayor is the one who appoints the police chief and has some elements of that. So it seems like there's some level of a cover up. The family's still fighting for that. I did interview them to talk about it. And of course, in May 2023, Sam Altman went to the Bilderberg Group in Lisbon, Portugal, along with Eric Schmidt of Google, Microsoft's employees, DeepMind's employees, heads of those. And then he's also involved with this whole WorldCoin project. I'm not sure if you've seen that. That's like the giant orb. People scan their eyes, and then they promise they're going to give them basically universal basic income that they promise is a way to sort of fight against AI taking people's jobs. And then although Elon wasn't directly mentioned this, and there is like this sort of narrative, whether true or not, about him and Altman kind of having like a rough relationship since they worked at OpenAI, I did include in here just for people's reminder that Elon was also involved with promoting mRNA during COVID. It was his company, Tesla, that worked with a German company called CureVac to build what they called mobile molecular printers for mRNA injections, what Elon called RNA microfactories. And then in 2020, he was receiving the Alex Springer Award, and he was giving a talk about mRNA technology and what he was excited about. And he said, quote, "You can do basically anything with the synthetic RNA DNA. It's really like a computer program. So, I mean, with enough effort, you could probably stop aging, reverse it if you want. You can turn someone into a freaking butterfly if you want with the right DNA sequence." And the reason I mentioned that is because it's kind of part of the language that we saw during COVID about like with the mRNA injections, that the human body is like an operating system, that we need upgrades, like the boosters were talked about in terms of upgrades. And that itself is kind of part of the genetic engineering of the human body that plays into the sort of transhumanist aspect of it. But
yeah,
I think we're both on the same page that that's not a good move. But I mean, what are your thoughts on, like, does that cause you, like, when you see things like that, do you feel less supportive of Trump? Like, do you feel like, or is it still just
hugely
kind of like,
less? Hugely less supportive of Trump in that regard. And I see it as bigger than Trump too. I mean, that's not just on Trump. That's also on Elon. That's also on Ellison. That's on everyone that's letting these people near him, everyone that's being involved in these discussions and not speaking up. That's on Bobby Kennedy for not speaking up. And you know, it's not black and white. It's not a done deal, and we haven't seen what's going to come of it, but I can't imagine anything good is going to come of it. And it directly leads into a lot of the reporting that you, and especially I've read a lot of Whitney Webb's reporting about how they're moving towards this concept of pre-crime. And when you take Larry Ellison's statements from 9/11 in 2002 and you walk them forwards to today and where technology is today, and his statements that he just made that you quoted in that article that were fucking bonkers, that is all a direct line to pre-crime. And pre-crime is the embodiment of the Orwellian nightmare. And anyone that doesn't know about pre-crime should read some of Whitney Webb's writing about it. Probably I would imagine you've got some great articles about it. That is one of the bigger fears that I think that you do a great job of talking about, that we need more people talking about, because it's one of those sort of like things that isn't real until it already is happening around you, and people can't understand the gravity of it until it's already here. And with robots coming and AI coming and all these surveillance technologies that are evolving so quickly, it's I worry that it's here faster than people even realize. And really all the infrastructure is already in place. It's just sort of the implementation of policy at this point, as far as I can understand.
Well, and you're absolutely right. All the infrastructure is here, and that kind of leads us, I think, in a perfect way into Peter Thiel, because as Whitney and others have reported, but I'll definitely want to give credit to Whitney, the origins of Peter Thiel's company Palantir was directly born out of the end, or the alleged end, of the Total Information Awareness Program that was created at post 9/11. And for those who haven't seen that program, it was the one that had the logo with the all-seeing eye overlooking the world, and
literally
nothing scary or crazy about that. And this is, of course, again, in that post 9/11 hysteria where we get Ellison saying, "Hey, we need digital IDs and all this stuff." They were trying to push through as much stuff as they could. And I think it's a sign of how much things have changed, that 20 years later, a lot of people don't give a shit about privacy anymore. But in 2002, 2003, 2004, even despite 9/11 and all the hysteria, there still was pushback when the government was moving too quickly. And so they tried to launch the TIA program. It was shut down. But as Whitney shows, that John Poindexter and a couple other folks involved in that ended up communicating and connecting directly with Peter Thiel and the folks, Alex Karp, and the folks who started Palantir, and basically took everything they wanted to do through the government and then brought it into this private company, so-called
private partnership.
Exactly. That is known as Palantir. And Palantir now is partnered with Israel and helping them with everything they're doing. And we can expect Palantir and associated Peter Thiel companies, and of course Musk companies, to continue to get contracts as we go forward. And so I think this is a good time to bring up Peter Thiel now.
I mean, you mentioned the naming of total information awareness, but the naming of Palantir is equally dystopian and fucked up, because the Palantiri are these seeing stones that grant the user immeasurable power in Lord of the Rings, but they also corrupt their souls and turn them to evil. Is like the lore around the name Palantir is impossible to see as an accident in my mind.
Yeah, and they're definitely obsessed with Lord of the Rings. And after we go through Thiel, I want to show you one of the articles. I don't know if I sent it to you before, where I started to look into the roots, because I think it's important for us to understand the roots. Like Peter Thiel didn't just come up with these ideas on his own. And when you look at the roots of the man behind him, Curtis Yarvin, who his ideas of the Dark Enlightenment, the neo-reactionaries, they also talk about. He has like a whole analogy about the orcs and the elves and this and that, and like the way that they see the classes of society. But I want to just show this one here. This is, again, another article I wrote for The Last American Vagabond. And guys, I'm trying to drop all the links there, but just in case you're interested, just go to The Last American Vagabond. You can find my author page and find these articles. And all I did here was just, I kind of got sick of trying to tell people like how many folks are associated with Peter Thiel and Trump's administration. So I just did an article that's simply just a rundown of each of those people, who they are, and how they're related and associated with Peter Thiel. And this also, as I think you watched it, Ian, it ended up becoming the basis for this mini documentary that I released a couple of weeks ago. You can find it at theconsciousresistance.com, just called Donald Trump, Peter Thiel, and the Technocrats. They're both pretty much the same thing. I used my article to kind of create the mini documentary, but we're going to start with Vance, because I know you had some things to.
Yeah, Vance is a big one. And Vance is one that not a lot of people, and myself included, when Vance came on the scene, I had no fucking background on Vance at all. And actually people like you have been a real help in doing a lot of the legwork to draw a lot of these connections into one place, because I think a lot of people do not realize just how tied to Thiel, and thereby to Thiel's backers and to Thiel's interests, Vance has been for his entire career.
Absolutely. You want to go ahead and share? I'll share my article in just a second, but I think you said you wanted to start with some facts about Vance and things.
I mean, the facts that I want to share about Vance are the exact facts you have in this article, and the exact facts you brought up in the documentary that made it even more kind of condensed for people.
So then we'll go through a couple of things here. So as you said, like Vance, I don't think many people were paying attention to him, but his prior life to being the vice president was, his claim to fame was the senator from Ohio. He also wrote this book, Hillbilly Elegy, that got turned into a movie, which is why he does have an acting credit. Because I see people out there saying like, oh, both Trump, Zelensky, and Vance all have an IMDb page.
But it is suspicious. It's a little weird that Vance gets a Netflix special film made all about him. Right.
These are the kind of things that make me feel like it's a scripted narrative. Like, that doesn't just happen
in that direction.
That doesn't just happen out of anywhere. And to me, like, this is how psychological propaganda, fifth generation warfare works, is that they seed certain concepts and people, characters in our minds. And this is why, a lot of people are suspicious of you as well. Of just that, because these things are realistic, not to say that we can definitively prove this person or that person, but in the case of somebody like JD Vance, and then his kind of rise, and now he's in vice president, he's got all this background to Peter Thiel, he presumably would be the person to carry the MAGA mantle from Trump if Trump does, retire, being so old. So it does kind of, in my mind, it's not that hard to see that narrative being crafted in the same way that people pointed at Obama, and he was just this senator. 100%. Next thing, he's, everywhere, and he's running for president. So Vance, as I point out here, he's a 40-year-old former Ohio senator. It was in June 2024, last summer, where David Sachs, who's also mentioned in my report here, part of the PayPal mafia, who's also now the AI and crypto czar in Trump's administration, they have been rewarded for supporting Trump. He had a fundraiser at his San Francisco house, and Elon was apparently there. Just some of this whole PayPal mafia were there. And according to at least 2 or 3 different reports, and they didn't, they were anonymous, speaking with people who had knowledge of the event. So take that how you will, but it seems to be accurate. Seems to have been confirmed by this point that it was at this June 2024 fundraiser for Trump at David Sachs' house in San Francisco that he basically kind of took an unofficial poll and said, like, who should I pick as my VP? And they were like, JD, you need to pick JD. And then Elon also encouraged them to do the same thing. And then just a couple weeks later, because this is June 2024, the RNC's July 2024, Trump goes ahead and does that exact thing. And, Vance himself said that it was after he heard Peter Thiel give a speech at Yale in 2011 that, set him on his career in venture capital firms and big tech. And then he ends up getting a job as a junior investor with Thiel's Mithril Capital in 2016. He also worked at a biotech firm, Circuit Therapeutics. who the CEO, Frederick Moll, told the New York Times that that job was a favor to Peter. And it's really, I think for some people who don't know Peter Thiel and don't understand, like a lot of these folks, you can find tweets from people in the tech industry. They call him Saint Peter in some cases. Literally, it's this kind of creepy, cringe, religious aspect of how much they kind of place him up on a silver platter here. And then Vance, of course, starts his own venture capital firm, Narya Capital, which had backing from Eric Schmidt, who's, the so-called left-wing progressive Bilderberg steering committee member, as well as Peter Thiel, who's the more right-leaning Bilderberg steering committee member, as well as billionaire investor Mark Andreessen. And then, Peter Thiel, of course, gave him the biggest donation at the time. I don't think it's been any higher yet, but it was, at least at the time, $15 million, the biggest Senate donation to help him win his race. And then within 2 years, he's at the White House.
Yeah.
Like,
one of the things that makes me most concerned about JD Vance specifically, actually, is kind of a double-sided blade here, is that I really like him. Like everything that I've seen from him, like if I were just watching his press conferences and his words and his tweets, I like him. Like he's fucking articulate and he's like clever and he feels relatable. And like if I just had that to go off of, I was shocked at the debates. I was like, this guy's a great debater. He's well spoken. He's very good at his job, whatever that job is. And so that's actually where like having this background and these connections and these people supporting him and that he respects from his time with them, that's like almost even more concerning to me. And I don't know what to make of it, really. I'm not saying I hate JD Vance. I'm not saying I think he's like literally an operative of the deep state. I don't really know. And that's concerning to me because it's the smooth players like that are hard to read, that are hard to tell. Like maybe he's a regular guy that just has had backing from these guys and is just like, and sees them as stand up in his perspective. And maybe, but at the same time, with like all these connections, it's hard for me to like really land on that interpretation, despite how relatable he feels in the public eye. So I don't know what the fuck to make of him. And I'm concerned, and I definitely would have some serious misgivings if 2028 rolls around and suddenly it's JD Vance for president, which seems pretty likely at this point.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, we've seen it in Hollywood movies that are, kind of symbolizing the real truth of politics, that these people, man, they don't put out like, and I saw this just on a small local level when I ran for mayor of Houston. Like I was the outside guy, but I got to kind of peer in a little bit, right, and see how scripted, even on the local level, these people do not go in front of a camera. They don't make public statements without well-crafted, like written statements, without like setting the whole scene. Like they want to go to a park and look good. So I think that there was definitely an effort, for whatever aspect of JD Vance may be genuine in himself, but definitely this narrative of because think about this, Trump is trying to appeal to that middle America people who are ignored by the Democrats. JD Vance is like kind of liberal, because at the time he was like, I hate Trump, Trump
for real.
And he, but I'm still, I'm from Midwest America, Ohio. I'm a hillbilly. And he writes this whole thing. It turns into a Netflix movie, and it appealed to a lot of people. And then, he's kind of like you said, he's well spoken. He's clearly educated, got a lot of the connections. If you were trying to write a character that would fit perfectly into that role and maybe appeal to people, obviously the hard leftists aren't going to like him no matter what, but people who can kind of be like, yeah, I'm a working class guy. JD comes from that background.
Way more reasonable than Trump. Like,
yeah, like he's like, okay, I don't know about Trump, but this guy seems reasonable. But at the same time, it's just hilarious to me hearing him kind of, and he actually acknowledged this. Like at one point he was speaking about like the elites as if he wasn't one. And then he actually later kind of adjusted his thinking because of Curtis Yarvin, the man I want to share in a moment, who's actually the guy who influenced Peter Thiel. He said he heard Curtis Yarvin speaking on a podcast, and he realized like, actually, I'm an elite and I need to use that power. And so there's this whole narrative that Trump and the MAGA, Musk, et cetera, that they're the counter elite to the, progressive, left-wing, radical, whatever. And so that's kind of the narrative that's being put before us, is that these are the good guys. Yeah, they're billionaires and they're technocrats and they're elitists and they're, living a totally different life than you, and they have no relation to your average experience, but they're the counter to the Soros, to the, other sort of element of that. And I'm just not buying that. I'm not buying that that's accurate of what we're really dealing with here. Let me see. I don't want to go over this whole article because it's not super long, but there's a couple other people I want to mention, and I will share, guys, in just a moment. Again, if you want to see this mini documentary, it's only 15 minutes long for those who prefer to watch instead of read.
Concise and punchy.
Yeah, and thanks to my editor for who helped this. You can find it at theconsciousresistance.com. It's also, of course, on my Twitter page if you just go search in the media section. And it lists everything here that we're going over here. Of course, Elon, we've kind of covered. There's a couple other people I do want to mention. David Sachs. Howard Lutnick, I think, is a big one that is going to play a major role. He's, of course, was formerly a neighbor to Epstein in New York City, formerly a donor to Hillary Clinton. Also spoken at the World Economic Forum several times. He's kind of leading the way with the sort of Bitcoin crypto angle, which I'm very mistrusting of. Even as somebody who's been involved in the Bitcoin space since 2013, I think what we're witnessing is what Whitney and Mark Goodwin rightfully report as the sort of stable coin surveillance. You know, there's definitely moves happening there that we don't have time to get into today. But Howard Lutnick is another big piece of this puzzle. He's also one of the guys who helped Rumble go public with their acquisition in 2021. And I think people need to pay more attention to him. Jim O'Neill, Whitney reported about him over at the HHS and all of his Peter Thiel connections. Ken Howry, this is one I did want to mention because this relates to sort of this thing we're hearing about. Trump wants Greenland and this sort of thing. So Trump named Ken Howry as the U.S. ambassador to the Kingdom of Denmark. And I started to look at him, and right away, there's Peter Thiel connections, there's World Economic Forum connections, and some folks are like, okay, big deal, ambassador to Denmark, you know, what does that matter? But then you realize that, well, Denmark are the ones who actually have administrative control over Greenland. They're officially part of their kingdom, and so they would be the ones to make any decision whether or not to, you know, willfully or otherwise give up of Greenland. And Howry himself, he was a PayPal co-founder with Peter Thiel. He also helped co-found Peter Thiel's venture capital fund, the Founders Fund. He was named a member of the Young Global Leaders in March 2012. And he's also currently a member of the World Economic Forum's Technology Pioneers program. And just those two things alone, man, I want to get your thoughts on this real quick. Is like, I feel like, you know, back to the whole thing, right? Kamala wins, right? Kamala wins, and she starts appointing World Economic Forum people, Bilderberg members. You know, MAGA's losing their shit. You know, everybody's calling that out. But I haven't seen a single person be honest and like, I don't know, this is kind of shady. It's just like people don't want to acknowledge these connections. Even if you took the Peter Thiel thing out of the conversation for a moment, just that, I mean, it seems like a year ago, people were pretty concerned about young global leaders and World Economic Forum ties. What do you think about that? Or, I mean, am I off base there?
No, I agree. I agree. And I think that is even a trend, even in like the more alt media side of the conservative media, for a lot of people. And it's like this, I think a lot of it rides on people's egos in a granular way, as in people in like my position and your position, we have this big incentive that's only magnified the bigger your platform gets and the more views you get, that through your own ego incentivizes you not to walk back your own statements and not to change your mind and not to admit that, like, I was super supportive of Trump, but this is not looking good. I'd made this thing, I made this vote, this decision, this public statement, but I was wrong. And so I worry that part of it is human failing, that a lot of people on the right, which is, I would argue, is the more informed and digging and research based element of the alternative media at this point, because so much of the left alternative media is just still stuck in Trump derangement syndrome. But that has now led us into this world where all of these slime bags and snakes that are slithering into this administration, even if the administration had the best intentions at the top, it still is being ignored. All these players that are in the game at this point. I completely agree. And your camp and everyone in your camp gets a lot of shit for calling these things out because it's not popular, and you lose views over it and you lose potential audience over it. But like, the job of the media is not to be popular, it's to report on what's going on, right? And Howard Lutnick is a good example of a guy that like I know very little about and have heard very little about, partially because of this exact phenomenon that you're referring to.
Yeah, and you know, I appreciate you giving credit to those of us who are trying to just. I don't even think it's necessarily just my crew or whatever, however you want to. It's just those of us who I think are being objective about this, and this is why, you know, just to bring into the conversation for a moment, this is why you are getting shit from David Icke and from other people who feel like and whether it's malicious or it's just your personality or the way you approach it, that okay, well, Ian, you're capable of following the money, you're capable of going down these rabbit holes, but then you're kind of letting off the gas on these certain areas, whether that's just because you're busy and life's busy or whatever else, or you're just choosing not to go down certain areas. Meanwhile, as you acknowledge, I get called Trump derangement syndrome probably every other day, for just bringing up facts like on this stuff. And it's frustrating. It doesn't mean I'm going to stop in any way. In fact, it kind of makes me more committed to doing it. But I think it's unfortunate because for me, and I think you as well, the whole motivation with even being an independent journalist or podcaster, content creator, or whatever, is to actually make a difference, is to try to inform people, to try to get people better information so they can make better decisions in their lives, and maybe even potentially stop all this crazy shit if it's at all possible. And so when you put in that energy, and then the best people can offer back, if they're indeed real people, which some of them are surely bots, is well, it would have been worse if Kamala won, or you have TDS or this and that. And instead of, like I said earlier, just dealing with the facts, like, can somebody tell me why I'm not supposed to care that Ken Howery is a World Economic Forum young global leader, or why I'm not supposed to care about all these Peter Thiel connections? And I haven't got any legitimate response from anybody other than one of those kind of, like I said, sort of low, knee-jerk reactions about, well, at least it's not Kamala. And I think that's sad, because if for people who maybe genuinely do want to make America great again or make America healthy again, as I think I ended our talk last time, like, don't be in a cult, like, just be willing to question, and like, be willing to question these things, because if you're not really following the truth, then that's why people are going to call you a cult member. If you're not willing to say, hey, you know what, like I think you're doing in this conversation, hey, I'm good on these things, I'm hopeful in these areas, but this doesn't look good at all. If people aren't capable of doing that, and I'd say you're more capable of doing that than some might give you credit for, then that is why I'm speaking like for those of us who are critical of Trump, say like it looks like there's cult members out there. I mean, and I think it's not an unfounded criticism.
Yeah, no, totally. I agree. And I don't think I think that anyone that calls me one of those cult members is wildly ill-informed, but I think there are a lot of like very respectable criticisms that get leveled against me that I feel like I have a very like capable and strong response to if I was in conversation with those people. Like when we talk, I think that we dig open every idea, and I'm not stressed. Like I don't worry about talking to you, because like when truth is the mission, it doesn't really matter. Like if you're wrong, you're wrong. That's fine. Just learn. And like you say, the point, I think, for a lot of us is to get everyone more informed. And I would argue that for me, the point is actually still to this day, just to get myself more informed, because I have so much to fucking learn and catch up on. And right from the start, that was really the point of my content. And like everything that you just brought up in that article is such a good example of like the depths that these things go to are so complicated that, especially with the Trump presidency, I think I come across as sort of flip-floppy on the Trump presidency and a little like uncertain. And it's because I am, because I see arguments from like, just to like throw it all the way to the other side, I see arguments from Q people that sometimes are like, fair point, bro. Like, I will look into that. I didn't know about that. And actually, I'm seeing evidence. And then I see arguments from people that are like complete on the other side of things, that are like, so sort of like from the trust the plan side to the like, no, it's literally the plan is Trump and it's fucking horrible. And both sides have very good evidence in both directions. And I just think that it's so complicated, because I don't think, my opinion, and I bet maybe we disagree on this, my opinion is not that the Bilderberg group and the Atlantic Council and the WEF and all these groups, my opinion is not that they are one aligned force that is a steamroller going in one direction. I'm of the opinion that they are changing, that they are currently under a changing of the guard. And the WEF is a great example. Klaus is clearly on the way out. Klaus is an old, not like, he's not senile yet, as far as I can tell, but he's old and he's out of touch, and he's clearly not the leadership that organization needs if they want to stay relevant. And I'm sure that I am not as smart as many of the people in that organization that see that weakness and are vying for that power. And if there's one thing that's true of the people in these organizations, is that they're power hungry pieces of shit for the most part. And so I'm of the opinion that there's a lot of power struggles going on behind the scenes in this like deep state of whatever you want to call it. And so I'm trying to do a lot of understanding, like, because in general, I'm not going to agree with 95% of the things that these people come up with. But also I think it's important to understand like who is actually in power and what actually are their goals. And I don't think it's as simple as they're all one organization and Trump is their guy, because I think that Trump is their guy for a part of them, right? For like the Thiels of that world, so to speak. But I also think that there's a large guard in that group, in that class of people, that see it the other way and would have much rather had Kamala and much rather had the George Soros sort of like socialist subversion kind of a movement going. And whether that's because they think they're aligned to the same goals and they just think it's a better strategy, or whether it's because they're actually in like ideological conflict, I don't know. But I'm careful because like Kennedy is a good example where I see so much positive potential, even through his failings. I see so much good in fixing our food and addressing vaccines a little bit, even if not all the way. I'm trying to, and this is just, I'm trying to learn to be more careful in general, because every time as a journalist you make a mistake, you learn the gravity of making a mistake when you have a following of 1 million people. And so I'm trying to be cautious in my reads of what's going on in this incredibly complex space when I see potential for good, like someone like Kennedy, where I came out when that first article got published, the Fox article, and it was like, the title was atrocious, and I just like blasted it on Twitter and was like, this is fucking garbage. But then more nuanced and intelligent people than myself were like, yeah, but read the article and like take your time and think carefully about what's in here. And it's like, okay, I see your point, and I should have been a little more careful and reasoned and thoughtful and slow in how I approached it. Thiel is not a good example of that, because I feel pretty confident criticizing Thiel based upon his connections to Epstein, his connections to all these other groups. But some of the players, I'm like, I'm worried about making up my mind too quickly, which is also, you know, a trap to fall into.
Yeah. And I think you make a great point there, just not only for those of us who are content creators, journalists, but just for anybody out the internet. This is a piece of advice I'm trying to take more often myself as well, is that we don't need to be in a rush to be right. Like when it's ego based and it's just like, I want to be the first person to post about this thing or whatever. Yeah, you often make mistakes. And if you're somebody who is just a random person on the internet, you know, maybe it makes no difference. But like you said, if you've got 1 million followers, or like myself, I don't have 1 million followers, but my word is all I have. And if I report things that are wrong, and then people are like, I used to trust Derrick, but then he started posting these other things that aren't so accurate, then I lose that support. And so it does matter. And into your other point, generally speaking, I don't necessarily think it is one homogenous group that is running things. I refer to it as the pyramid of power. That's the name of my documentary series, if anybody wants to check that out, at thepyramidofpower.net. But just to the point of the World Economic Forum as one example, that there is sort of a lineage and link over with these groups. Again, Whitney Webb and Johnny Vedmore have done some great reporting on the origins of the World Economic Forum, the connections between Klaus Schwab, and he was mentored by Henry Kissinger, essentially. And, you know, there's some CIA connections going back to Harvard there as well. And so you have some of these same forces that have been collaborating. Of course, Kissinger was involved in the Club of Rome, the Bilderberg Group. So there definitely is overlap between these groups. I don't think that means that they're always united on 100% of every single issue. I do think at the end of the day, they align closer together than they would, you know, with the people. And so even when they have some differences, they find ways to collaborate. And that's probably one of the reasons they're so successful, is while we bicker about with each other online and accuse each other of being controlled opposition. And even when we have suspicions, like I told you, I've had suspicions towards you, but at the end of the day, can I prove any of it? No. And does it serve me more to just divide and separate, or to try to figure out, all right, well, let's at least have a dialogue? That's why these people are successful, because they get together and they're organized and they talk and they put their little differences aside, even if they're kind of big, and they figure out how to further their agendas. I just got one
side note. Is the Pyramid of Power series really on here for free, dude? I've not watched them yet. This is awesome. I just opened this for the first time ever, and you have like multiple seasons breaking it down by element. It's fucking dope, dude. I'm gonna drop into this. And you start with Big Education, which is just like such a smart place to start, where most people wouldn't think to start. I'm super stoked to watch these things, man.
I appreciate that. I actually had it pulled up. I was going to go over it a little bit, but I'll just share about that real quick.
Yeah, because like to the rest of the world, for Derrick to do all the work, like me just looking at it right here, season 1, season 2, season 3, and there's like 5 or 6 episodes or something in these. Like that is so much time and labor on your part to then put that out on the internet for free. 95% of people would be putting that behind a paywall. So like huge respect, dude. That's super cool.
I appreciate it, man. So I'll just share with that real quick, and then we'll get back to some Thiel here. So for those who are interested, you can find it at thepyramidofpower.net. This has been a project I've been working on since 2021. It was originally a 2.5-hour talk I gave in 2018 that I realized was probably better as a format in video. And the whole goal with this is to, like you said, take it down in piece by piece. So the first, and it's in seasons of 4 episodes at a time. So we have 16 episodes out for free right now. People can see them. And it's big education, it's media, it's big tech. And as we progress up and through the pyramid, it gets a little bit more deeper and, you know, conspiratorial, but it's all 100% fact-based, everything in there. All the transcripts for every episode are there with all the links and everything that I cover. And the original idea was to make it, you know, 30 minutes or less, to try to make it bingeable for the Netflix generation.
Yep.
We've succeeded with, I think, 90%, maybe 80% of them have come in under that. There's a couple, like in season 3, when I cover the intelligence communities, obviously a huge episode, huge topic, because I talk about the US, UK, Israeli, and Chinese intelligence services. And it's just, you know, it's a big one.
Season 4 looks amazing. This is so inspiring. I've been kind of scheming on a similar, like, once you start to learn all this, you realize that we need a rewrite of the history of our country and the history of global power systems. And this is so in line with like what my brain is naturally coming to, like what we need. And dude, I am so stoked to watch through this and learn and to like get inspired. Nice work, dude.
I appreciate that. And I'll just say one other thing, we can get back to it, just because I want to give credit to my editors. I mean, I do all the research, I write the scripts, I record the audio narration. You guys can listen and you'll hear my voiceovers, but it wouldn't be as poppin' if it wasn't for several talented editors that I've been able to work with. Most recently, Steph and Becca, you guys know who you are. Just appreciate y'all. And I want to just mention this too, while we're plugging it. I'm actually doing a crowdfunding campaign right now for the final episode. I'm literally, you know, before we were doing this, I've been writing chapter 17 to answer the question of who's at the top. And, you know, I'm going to everything like Jesuits, Freemasons, Bilderberg Group, World Economic Forum, Club of Rome, Committee of 300, Venetian Black Nobility. And it has David Icke. It's got Richard Grove, James Corbett, G. Edward Griffin, a lot of people. Dude. And basically everybody just, everybody's sharing their view of who or what is at the top. And that includes Icke going into, you know, reptiles and things like that. So it's going to be
real quick. I want to clarify, my beef with Icke is entirely a joke on my end, because I actually have a lot of respect for him and I don't know much about his work. But he started attacking me and I was like, whoa, dude, what's going on? And so now I just poke back at him because I think it's hilarious. And because if your first interaction is to viciously attack someone, it's like, what do you want me to do, bro? But I have no beef towards Icke at all. I probably actually, I think the irony is that I probably actually agree with the vast majority of what he's talking about, reptilians included. And so I'm excited for the time when I finally do get to sit down and talk to David, because I think that largely the beef is a large misunderstanding and just a giant canyon of beef at this point, which is kind of funny and entertaining to me.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that in a second. I'll just share. I just dropped a link. If anybody does want to support, go to thepyramidofpower.net or theconsciousresistance.com. I do appreciate it. Like you said, Ian, I've been putting out all this stuff because I think the information needs to be out for free. So we've crowdfunded the entire series. I haven't got paid at all. It's just been to pay my editors. But once we wrap up this final one and we release it in May or June, we're going to make DVDs and USBs, and I'm going to turn it into a book as well. Take the scripts and make them into companion book.
Quickly to add to your plug too, regular people don't realize how expensive editing is. Editing costs a shitload of money because it costs a shitload of time on editors' behalfs, and it's no joke. And like honestly, to be able to crowdfund these episodes with just $10,000 is pretty impressive all on its own. So like anyone that wants to call you a grifter for this, that's bullshit. Like this kind of stuff takes time and it takes money, even when it's done at the most bare bones skeleton way. So like totally supporting alternative media like this is a worthwhile endeavor. And people that give like $2 or $3, $5 to a project like this from someone like Derrick, who's high integrity, that is a huge win for decentralizing information. Highly encourage anyone that can to do that.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that, brother. And yeah, again, the website's thepyramidofpower.net. Now, before we go on, let me ask you about that, because I do have some contact with Gareth and David Icke, and I went and interviewed David last year in the UK. Let's put it on the record so this can get clipped out and shared. Do you want to have a conversation with David Icke?
I would totally have a conversation with David Icke. Yeah, I have no problem with David. Just to put it on the record, my first, like, I had only ever heard of him in like the kind of like lore of like journalism and conspiracy theories. So I had no context on his work at all. And my first interaction with him was him like quote tweeting a post or commenting into one of my posts, basically just going after me so hard as like, this piece of shit is like a grifter that doesn't know what he's talking about. And it was just like really intense, but I have a thick skin and I'm not offended by that at all. But I certainly did go into this like, oh, let's play kind of a mode of like, all right, poke, which, you know, is somewhat infantile on my part, but it's also been really entertaining. I feel unfortunate about how the conversation on the Rogan podcast, like when you're in a live conversation, it's often hard to understand all the ramifications of exactly how your words are coming out as you're saying them, right? And so I do feel bad about how that conversation on Rogan got clipped and how that like specific, because I was not trying to call David Icke a grifter. I was not trying to say that he's making money off of what he's doing in any like, and I honestly don't think that that's what Joe was exactly saying either. I think that Joe was sort of speaking more broadly and that the wording was not very precise. So I feel bad about how David Icke kind of took bullets on that. I have no beef towards him, and I would happily sit down. And to clarify, I am 100% board with the concept that he is not talking about literal, I don't think, literal reptiles that are literally wearing human skins or anything like that, but rather much more of this like spiritual realm and these demonic entities that we seem to be having a lot of. I just am currently finishing editing a whole episode about the telepathy tapes and a lot of the tinfoil around the telepathy tapes that no one's talking about. I'm 100% on board with those deeper and more conspiratorial topics. I would love to sit down and talk to him.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I mean, I'm not going to speak for David Icke, but I know that he's always encouraging people to actually read his many, many books if they want to know where he stands on that. And I've for those who've seen just the recent episode of The Pyramid of Power, which was on religion and secret societies, Icke is in that, and you can go check that out. And he's definitely going to be in the final episode where he actually explains his view on this reptilian and sort of otherworldly, what he thinks is an otherworldly force that's at the top of the pyramid. But yeah, so I just wanted to get into that. Let's go ahead and just hit two more things and we'll wrap up for the night, man. I appreciate you being here and everybody who's hanging out. We're hopefully providing some good food for thought. That's the whole point of this. And
I think more than anything, we need to be modeling real debate, real conversations. Like there's nothing more important in this day and age than like people that are trying to be informed, that are informed, that are actually having conversations. That's the most important thing in my mind, is modeling what theoretically the Academy of Ideas is supposed to be built on, which is open discussion. So yeah, I'm all about
absolutely. It's about, so just I'll mention again, if you want to see more about the Peter Thiel stuff, go check out that mini doc on theconsciousresistance.com. Just two articles I want to briefly run through, man. I don't want to beat it too hard tonight, but anybody can check this out. This is what I was mentioning. So this is another one from TLAV I wrote at the end of February. Meet the man whose philosophy has influenced Peter Thiel and the technocrats. And I already kind of shared that in this podcast, which you can find, on the internet, everywhere. Look up JD Vance talking about Curtis Yarvin. It was to Jack Murphy Live in 2021 when he said that he wanted to seize the institutions of the left, fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, replace them with our people, ignore the courts if they try to stop him. And this is what he was saying.
That was what Vance said?
This is what Vance said back in 2021.
Damn,
this
bro.
is before he was even kind of publicly being considered for
one of those sentences he wishes wasn't on the record anymore, probably.
I mean, this is what he said right here. This is the exact quote. And I went in and I listened to it myself. So this is not fake news, everybody. I think what Trump should do, if I was giving him one piece of advice, fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state, replace them with our people. And when the courts stop you, stand before the country and say, the Chief Justice has made his ruling. Now let him enforce it. And then when he asked, like, well, where'd you get these ideas? He said, so there's this guy, Curtis Yarvin. He's written about some of these things. And he said, again, I saw and realized something about the American elite and about my role in the American elite. And that just took me a while to figure out. And I was red-pilled. And this plays right into what this dude, Curtis Yarvin, who used to write, his old blog is called Unqualified Reservations. It's kind of archived now, but he was writing a lot in 2007, 2014. And it became known as the Dark Enlightenment or the neo-reactionaries, essentially the predecessor to what ended up becoming known as the alt-right and then MAGA. Yeah. And he like Thiel has said, like, democracy has failed, which, I tend to kind of agree. I think there's a lot of flaws in democracy, but he says it should be replaced by a monarchy. And he called for a national CEO or what's called a dictator. Those are his words. And back in 2017, there was an email exchange between Curtis Yarvin and Milo Yiannopoulos that was leaked. And
no way.
Yeah, this is interesting. Curtis Yarvin said in this text message, he said that he was watching the 2016 presidential election with Peter Thiel, and he said, quote, he's fully enlightened. He just plays it very carefully. Like, meaning like, he's on their side kind of thing. He's just not publicly about it.
Dude, the Milo lore just expands every day on the internet for me.
Dude, he's deep in there, man. And people forgot about him. He's kind of gone away a little bit, but he's still... But I actually, the reason this is, I was keeping up with this is because when I got involved in my activism in 2010, it was through the End the Fed movement, Ron Paul, going to libertarian conventions and then eventually getting asked to speak at them. And around 2015, 2016, when Trump comes on the scene, I see a lot of libertarians going towards Trump, in my view, selling out their principles. And so I had written this essay called Removing the Alt-Right Infection on the American Libertarian Movement back in 2017, and talking about this and how there's a connection between some people in the libertarian movement like Hans Hermann Hoppe and how they were kind of, giving some favor, playing, at least being friendly towards the Curtis Yarvins of the world and kind of giving them credit. And so Yarvin's sort of been in the background, but he and the interesting thing is that even Steve Bannon has called him out, even though Steve Bannon's not directly close to
I've never heard of Yarvin before. I had to look him up when you mentioned him, and it's like, man, a whole nother dig. This is deep.
There's definitely more people paying attention to him now than there were 5 years ago. And the unfortunate thing is, again, it's mostly a bipartisan thing. So you're not going to see many people on the right talking about it. So it's easy for MAGA to be like, oh, that's just left wing, hate, blah, blah, whatever. But there's legitimate concern here of like this guy's ideas and how he's influenced Trump and Peter Thiel and the people around him. But Bannon said that he was once influenced by Curtis Yarvin, but actually recently he told the New York Times podcast that, quote, this thing is all tied together. And he's talking about the technocrats. He says they want techno-feudalism. They have a very well thought out philosophy, very well thought out set of ideas, and they're trying to implement that. And to me, everybody's afraid, everybody's scared because of their power. So, even he's kind of warning, like, these people got more power than folks realize. And then I mentioned the whole influence on JD Vance. So that's just one aspect. I think, I'm not saying this guy is going to, just to show like how he has grown to being some random, obscure, as you can see in this picture, kind of nerdy looking dude. He was recently on the New York Times podcast. Now he's grown to the point where they're actually treating him like, even if they disagree with him, on as a credible philosopher. So he's gone from being just a nobody writing a blog in the 2000s and mid 2000s to now kind of behind the scenes being sort of an advisor to many of the people. In his words, he said, it's not necessarily even Trump directly, but it's like a lot of the younger people that are coming in the Trump admin are very influenced by his way of thinking and his thought process. So he's definitely somebody who has played a role in Peter Thiel's thinking and has played a role in JD Vance's thinking. And I think more people need to, put a spotlight on him.
Yeah, those sorts of statements where you get a window into the sort of behind the scenes, behind the strategy persona of politicians is extremely valuable. And I think it is a testament to your skill as a journalist too, to notice that, to pinpoint it and to hone in on it. Among the millions of things that Vance has said publicly, there are some statements that hold way more weight than other statements.
I agree. So I encourage people to just go look up Curtis Yarvin. You can find that Last American Vagabond. And last thing here, Ian, that I want to share, and then maybe we can finish up with JFK files and just thoughts on that. So this is, we've been talking about Doge. Like my basic premise or my concern, I obviously don't have all the pieces of evidence, but my concern is that Doge, as I was sharing earlier, and talk of efficiency is really just, as my article here indicates, is a gateway towards technocracy. Now, as a libertarian, as an anarchist, really, like there's a world where I want government completely stripped and deconstructed as much as possible. Now, of course, I also can balance that with recognizing that there's a lot of people currently dependent on the government, and that would end up being not good because people aren't sovereign at the moment. People aren't self-sustaining. Yep. And, there's a lot of things that would need to take place before that would be a good situation. So on one hand, I can have sympathies of like, yes, like Department of Education, get rid of it. These different things, like this is stuff Ron Paul was talking about years ago, right? Yep. So it's very similar in that way. But because of everything else we've already outlined with Peter Thiel and Musk's connections, and I think I shared a lot of this the first time we talked about Musk's military industrial complex contractor, Tesla, SpaceX, Starshield, the satellite, everybody I think is familiar with that and the amount of money this guy's making through military industrial complex contracts. And he's one of the people like Thiel who stand to benefit a lot financially. And I know some people are like, he's the richest guy in the world. What does he care about? Well, maybe he just wants to win, but his companies are definitely already benefiting from his closeness to Trump. And so I kind of, as I've been studying technocracy now for 6 or 7 years, and then, standing on the shoulders of people like Patrick Wood and others who've been doing it since the 70s, looking into the history of the technocratic movement, which goes back to the 1930s in the US. And I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but that whole thing about Greenland, like I was sharing earlier, the original technocrats had this view of what they called the North American technate. And
that was a crazy piece of your documentary, dude.
Yeah. And so that included Greenland, Panama, Mexico. It's the North American Union. And this is the kind of places that Trump is like, hey, we need to take the Panama Canal back. We need Greenland, etc. So I started to study the technocracy movement, and technocrats, essentially, for those who are, not in the know yet, they just believe that the scientists, the technologists, the engineers should be running society. We should get rid of the political class. We should get rid of the business class. And there should just be a technate, which is what they call their sort of governing body. And this would be micromanaged by the engineers. And at the top, you would have the technocrat king, different titles they give themselves. So they had their moment in the 1930s and 40s, and then they sort of disappear, allegedly. But as I point out here in this article, in the 1970s, deep state agent Zbigniew Brzezinski, who is now gone, but he was responsible for all kinds of horrible stuff that I'm sure you're familiar with, Ian, and his relationship with Kissinger. In 1970, he writes a book called Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era, calls it technotronic instead of technocratic. But he describes the same thing, like a technologically advanced world, but it's very much an authoritarian kind of style collectivism where individual liberties and privacy are sort of subordinated to this needs of the collective. And it's actually, people need to know too, that the technocrats were the first people to propose energy credits, energy certificates, which sound very much like carbon credits. Yeah. So anyways, I started looking like who were the people that influenced the technocratic movement, because all philosophies tend to build on top of each other. And there was actually a movement, and I didn't know this till I wrote this article last week. There was actually a movement called the efficiency movement during the progressive era of the US from like the late 1800s to about 1930, pretty much right as technocracy starts to take off. And they were basically trying to identify waste mainly in the workplace, but also in society as a whole. And this is actually where the term best practices first comes from. And this movement was supported by Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller Sr. and Jr. And I found this book called Bureaus of Efficiency, Reforming Local Government in the Progressive Era. And there was actually, I didn't even know this, but there was actually agencies of the US government 100 years ago called efficiency bureaus.
That's
and
wild.
in fact, even in 1916, 1933, the US government under Woodrow Wilson operated the US Bureau of Efficiency. Chicago had the Efficiency Division. New York City had New York City Bureau of Municipal Research. So there was they called them municipal research bureaus. And then like a subset of that was efficiency bureaus. And the Rockefellers were definitely involved in promoting this, related to their alleged philanthropy. But the whole idea, they said, was they wanted to create a, quote, permanent administrative branch of government that would be divorced from politics. And I think this is where we're kind of seeing what the technocrats are doing, what Elon, I believe, is doing with Doge. It says, under this model, politicians would decide government policies, but an administrative cadre, that's their words, would implement the policies. This would contribute to the rise of an academic discipline called public administration. And they sought to create, quote, at all levels of government, a permanent merit-based civil service system that would be beyond the reach of elected officials and would employ experts and technocrats to advise politicians of the rational choices available to them. And so this movement spreads all over. You get efficiency bureaus. And then one final thing, there's a guy named Frederick Winslow Taylor, who actually, weird kind of side note, the original book, Cheaper by the Dozen, the whole family movie, is based on his life, apparently, just like another weird thing. But he was part of the efficiency movement, but specifically his own movement was just called Taylorism, and he promoted what he called scientific management. And this dude was allegedly carried around a stopwatch everywhere he went, and was always trying to make things more efficient and save time. And he took it from beyond the workplace, though, and how can we just look at all human activity and make things more efficient, even to the point where some of the books I was reading and some of the articles about him, where he was studying, imagine the workplace and people on the assembly line, even studying okay, if they turn left instead of right, they save 5 seconds of time, and that could save us, $100 or whatever, studying the human movements and the way they lifted things, and just hyper, in my mind, kind of micromanaging central planning. And basically, just to wrap it up, there's people who were critical of his views back then who saw that, hey, this could be beneficial, but also some of his other peers, a woman named Mary Parker Follett, for example, she was a philosopher, and she said in 1918 in her book, The New State, quote, the Taylor system is based on the idea that the worker is a machine and that the manager is the one who knows how to run the machine. And I found another paper from this professor in 1970 who basically said that, again, Taylorism could be used as a way to improve efficiency and economic growth, but it could also be used to justify authoritarianism and to suppress the rights of the workers. And then just one really interesting final note is they even noted that Vladimir Lenin, a revolutionary communist Bolshevik leader, about 6 months after the October 1917 revolution in Russia,
Wow.
Lenin actually wrote a paper saying, quote, "We must organize in Russia and study and teach of the teachings of the Taylor system and systematically try it out and adopt it to our purposes." So he was calling for like a socialist kind of Taylorism because they recognize that this could be a way to kind of micromanage society and the workers and this sort of thing. And it was also popular in Germany in World War I leading up to World War II. And so I kind of end the article just saying that, like, my view is like with the influence of Curtis Yarvin and the sort of neo-reactionary technocrat, we need a CEO king, and the technocrats who want the engineers, and then the movements that came before them, the efficiency movement, scientific management, that they are using this Doge idea as sort of a red herring to maybe they will reveal some stuff, US aid and others, and get rid of some bad things. That ultimately, though, it's about bringing in AI governance. And then I kind of just end the article showing that just in the last week, there's dozens of articles showing different ways that Doge is already starting to implement AI, including deciding over which people are going to be fired and which different budget cuts should happen. And maybe in some ways those might be more efficient. But I think it's very interesting that the World Economic Forum also has a program called AI Governance Alliance that they launched in June 2023 that calls for doing many of these same things. And even, we were talking about the border program. It was reported just a couple of weeks ago that they're using AI for what they're calling a catch and revoke program to determine which pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas students to go after. So they're already starting to bring in these different AI aspects. And like when I put that together, I see Musk and Thiel and this whole cabal promoting brain chips, mRNA vaccines, transhumanism, AI governance. Like, I don't know. Like I said, I don't really see so much, to go back to our question of would this have been different with Kamala? I don't really know if it would have been. I don't know, man.
Strong argument, man. Strong argument. And you put it together really well. And Thiel is such a great, an important linchpin in that, because he's been testing all these technologies out in Israel on the people in Gaza. Well, more actually, so the people in the West Bank, where they're actively, like, Israeli tech firms and Palantir in partnership with them have been testing all of these AI surveillance technologies on Palestinians for a decade and more already. And I would argue, like, I would argue made a really strong argument there, but B, I would also argue that even if that's not all of their intentions, like, suppose Elon's your guy, right? And Elon, it just is a pure human. He's an autist that just wants to go to Mars. Even so, this is an extremely dangerous walk down the technological road, and the danger is partly that they make good arguments. The danger is partly, it's like same as eugenicism. Eugenicism is founded on arguments that can sound sound if you ignore all the social and spiritual and moral implications of what that, like, efficiency principle entails, which is the erasure of humanity, the erasure of our sovereignty. And so I'm of the mind that the technologies are coming regardless, and we as a people, we as journalists, we as sovereign people need to be doing our best to examine it, call it out, and to be aware of the dangers, and to promote sovereignty and freedom of speech above all else in every way going forwards. Because you're right, it's not looking good. And even if some of them don't have those evil intentions in mind, I think it's pretty obvious that some of them definitely do. And potentially most of them, if not all of them. And so the way I see it is, I mean, and I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm agreeing with you right here. The way I see it is that if this is coming, we need to be advocating for the thing that sort of holds us up against it at all costs. I'd be curious if you have a different take on this. Is, in my mind, our best defense against it is a stalwart, like, stance on the hill of freedom of speech and of sovereignty of the individual and individual liberties and rights, and that sort of, like, libertarian mind. And we need to build that up as not a political movement, but as a basic, like, human values movement in our culture, because I see that as the only defense. AI is coming, and it's gonna take jobs regardless. So we need to remember, why does it matter to be a sovereign individual? Like, surveillance is coming, so we need to remember, why does it matter to have privacy and to have individuality? Do you agree or disagree on that?
No, I'm totally with you, man, and I'm glad that this is where we're going as we get to the end here, because I agree. I mean, and this is basically what I was trying to say to you back in October, whenever it was prior to the election, that kind of the way we ended then was that for me, even if you want to go vote for Trump or you're supporting RFK or whatever, all of those things you said still matter, because
Yep.
at the end of the day, even with a perfect human, perfect president going up against all these obstacles is not going to save us. And, is not going to be able to, as I said earlier with the whole Maha thing, isn't going to solve all of your problems necessarily. Like there's still a huge space in there and a necessity, I would say, for personal responsibility, for, as you said, individual liberty. I mean, this is why I'm very much a believer, not only, libertarian, but more specifically in the philosophy of voluntarism, which basically says that all relationships should be voluntary and consensual. And when to break that down, we look at a lot of our interactions and relationships with government are not voluntary and are not consensual. And so that's kind of what I work towards. And I can ally and work with other people like yourself, even if I don't agree on everything, because I think that in the interest of humanity's future, and I definitely am trying to be always very forward thinking and not just thinking about us, but the coming generations, the coming 7 generations and beyond. Like I need to work with people, even if I'm not 100% on the same page. So if you're a person who can get down and say, hey, you're a free sovereign individual, and I recognize that same thing in you, so I'm not going to violate you and, force you to do what I want, then we're probably going to be more on the same page than not. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to agree on voting and these other things. But that's kind of what I try to focus on. I think that you're really right to bring it back to that, because my point, and despite what a lot of people would try to say with folks out there who kind of run in the same circles I do and are doing similar research, is not to say, guys, be blackpilled, we're fucked, we're screwed, everything's over, because I don't think that at all. In fact, like the more I go down this direction, I feel empowered, because I try to help other people feel empowered to see you can't necessarily fully trust these people. And even if you like them in some areas, you still are responsible for your own life. You're still responsible for your own actions. And that's not, because I'll see the comments, I'm sure you see them like, well, if this is really true and Trump's not on our side or Elon's not on our side, well, then we're totally screwed. But that's not the case. Like these things can be true. And I think there's definitely a lot of facts. And obviously there's some, kind of guesswork here, but for the most part, we're dealing with facts. Those facts can be true, and there can still be hope. It doesn't have to be that because you discover the politician that you put your hope in, because that happened with people with Bernie. It happened with Beto. It happened, I think, with some people with RFK. And that's going to continue to happen. I guarantee you in a couple of years, once Bernie's too old to be the latest sheepdog, there will be a new person to come in and say, like, I'm going to defeat them, and then sell out and, endorse their opponent. No matter what, that's going to keep happening. And you can keep falling for it, or you can say, I'm taking my power back. I'm going to start looking at my own life and seeing what I can actually do for myself. And I think, like we touched on last time, that is something that, whether you realize it or not, you are doing and practicing. Like when we talked last time, you had made a move to Idaho, I think. And then, like, I know you're thinking of where home is now. That's, I think, what more and more people need to be doing. I'm not saying leave the United States necessarily or anything like that, but thinking in terms of like, what is the best place I can be as we march towards 2030 and whatever's in store for us, where I'm going to be able to take care of my family, where I'm going to be able to work with other like-minded people and live as close as possible in our imperfect world to the values and principles that I actually hold. Even if I'm still going to, I'm going to leave a little bit of my chips in the maybe Trump will save us basket or whatever, but still take care of yourself, still start taking those steps towards empowering yourself, because otherwise, let's imagine that Trump doesn't save us and that what I'm describing is accurate, and you didn't do anything because you just were, trusting the plan, or you were hoping that it was all 15D chess or whatever. I think I said this to you last time. There's no point in being awake if you're not doing anything with that information. Like, you can be awake and walk right into the FEMA camp, but hey, you watched all the documentaries, you watched all the podcasts, congratulations, but you didn't do anything with that information. Yep. So I'm glad that we're bringing it back.
That's the spiritual awakening you just elaborated right there, that I think everyone needs to be having for themselves. Because even if Trump is even if trust the plan is all right, and even if Trump is absolutely our guy and he's totally doing all this shit behind the scenes, even then, if you didn't do anything over the next 8 years, you're still going to be the person that's getting poisoned by all the foods you're addicted to. You're still going to be the person that's not acting on the intellectual stimulation you could be learning from. You're still going to be the person that's not building wealth and life, like the real kind of wealth and like real sovereignty around your family. And you're still going to wind up in a world dictated to you by corporations and money, even if the politicians are trying to save you, which they're not. Like maybe some of them a little bit, who knows? But like it really doesn't matter. Like I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. And I think that one of the best things the internet has done for us and for this world is that by connecting everyone and giving us time over years to understand how this connection can grow us and how we can learn and how we can share and collaborate, it has awoken this realization that we do have power to change our own lives, and we do have power to build our own communities. We do have power to say our own truths, to speak our own minds, and to find other like-minded individuals. So I couldn't agree more that the real pill is the sovereignty pill. And the real pill is like this, like you are your own actor in this world, and you're responsible for your own self and your own family, and you shouldn't expect anyone to save you. And be involved in politics if you want, be involved in investments and finance if you want, be involved in whatever it is that makes you feel like you're contributing and safe and doing well. But ultimately it's about you and your community. And if we all take that stance, what's the outcome? It's like suddenly the whole community is full of people that are being their best selves.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you about the JFK files, but I feel like we're at such a good closing point.
Yeah, it's a perfect closing point.
Yeah. Okay.
And we'll get more on that later. Right now, it's just a big nothing burger. I mean,
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, it's like whatever.
Not really much to get into there. I want to just I'll just share this real quick because I know I mentioned this to you before. For anybody who does want to pick up on that thread of what we're just discussing, this is what I call exit and build, exiting from systems that don't align with your values. Again, this is completely free. If you go to my website, theconsciousresistance.com/EXB, just the letters there. I did this 45-day exit build challenge actually right around the time we were talking. I did it leading up to the election. So it's 7 weeks long. And I basically go through food, money, technology, land, education, mindset, and habits, and then how to think holistically. It's just a free thing to take. If you want to take it seriously, if you actually want to learn more about these ideas and some of what Ian and I are touching on, I highly encourage you to do it. I put it out there for the purposes of helping people. And so far, we've been getting lots of positive responses of people who actually take it seriously. And I argue that if you were to take something like this and what Ian was just sharing seriously, even if you're going to keep putting your hopium in RFK or Trump or whoever else, and you actually take these concrete steps, you will see change in your life. And that way, if what I'm concerned about ends up becoming true, at the very least, you've started taking real steps towards, your own freedom. And I think that's really what it comes down to. So I just want to invite anybody who's curious to check out that and can learn more at the website there.
Dude, every resource you're pulling up is so impressive to me, working in the same field, being many years behind you, and like in my progression in here is like, dude, you've put so much work into this, and this is such a resource. This is mind-blowing to see, like, because I think that regular people don't realize how much work it takes to make a fucking online course and to make these resources and to make these videos and to like actually make these like, this is really badass, dude. Nice work. This is inspiring.
I appreciate that, brother. And I'll just mention it again because I think somebody's asking. It's theconsciousresistance.com/E, the letter EXB for exit and build. You can find it there. Take it at your own pace. Yeah, I appreciate that, man. I mean, it's a lot of work and energy. And, I said this before, and I know we talked about this privately, but you and I have gone back and forth, and I'm sure we will go back and forth on Twitter. Everybody, Ian can handle himself. I don't think he needs you defending him. Well, I think we're both big boys here. We can actually have a discussion. And even with not necessarily fully understanding, the scope of things, like I said, I remain skeptical about nearly everybody I meet until a certain point. I work with people until I feel I no longer can. And I feel at the very least, these dialogues we're having are very helpful for people, and I'm enjoying them. I know that everybody who has shared with me after our first one and was excited about this one, they seem to be enjoying the conversation, even if they're like, I see comments like, "Oh, I'm Team Derek, I'm Team Ian." It's not even really about that. Follow the facts really is what it comes down to. But this isn't intended to be some kind of personality contest or something like that. Ian, I value your efforts, and even where I think you might fall short or I think you have some blind spots, I still value that you're in the space doing it and that you're willing to sit here and talk with me. I think that says a lot about who you are and your personality.
Dude, right back at you, man. It's like it takes a lot to be in the space for a long time and to see how it goes with so many people in the space, to keep on working and to keep on making resources and to keep on engaging with people. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Echo everything you just said. I take no offense. Even when Derek like calls me out online, is like, bro, I fucking completely disagree with this shit. This is retarded. I don't take any offense to that. That's totally fine. Like, it's fun to be sassy on Twitter, and it's engaging. It's like important to call people out when you disagree with them, because who knows, maybe I'm wrong. Like, I fucking am wrong a lot. And sometimes it's like, oh shit, Derek is like bringing up a really good point here that I should look into.
And I'm wrong sometimes too, as well. I'm willing to admit that as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, we have no stress in this world. So in closing thoughts, do reach out to David, and I would totally sit down with David, and it would be funny and great to finish that feud, because I don't think there's as much of a feud as it turned into, although it is like the internet does love a good feud. But
awesome, brother. And just to, for you, I know that you have your event coming up. If you want to share a little bit about that, I know some of it's in flux, but you want to share anything about that?
Yeah.
Your websites and stuff?
The event is in flux. It was going to be Bottom Up Boston. It was going to be in June, and then a bunch of threats went into the venue, and the venue pulled out. No fault of theirs. They're new to the space, and they didn't realize what they were getting into, and they have families. And so we are pushing it back to fall, and we're probably going to do it in Austin. And I'm currently in talks with a bunch of different venues in the area that have held events that were controversial before, so that we are covered on that base. And realistically, it's going to be better and bigger than it was before, because of the way that this is sort of like, cold to hurt is the wrong word, but it sort of has like re-strengthened our resolve and given us more time and like a more friendly community to do it in. And I've gotten a whole bunch of support behind the scenes from dope people that see what's going on here. So the goal is to make more conversations like this happen in person, where you get people from all these different niches online, all these different personalities that study different things, that are focused on different things, but the common thread being that they put sovereignty and freedom of speech and freedom of ideas and genuine discussion as their higher values. And so that way, when you put all those people in a room, you never know who you're going to meet. You never know what you're going to learn. And you might have your mind changed about some things by some really smart people. So yeah, I'm stoked because really it's my first foray into this kind of like, how can I use this platform that I've been given to help promote this sort of like this movement of at least thinking critically, at least having discussions, even if we're wrong sometimes.
Yeah, and I definitely value that, man. So please, I look forward to hearing more about that. And did you launch a new website recently, or is
I
Twitter
did.
still the best
Yeah,
place to
my
find
new
you?
website is canceliancarroll.com, and it's it's not managed by me anymore, so I'm not going to fuck up all the shirt ordering finally. I'm so excited to be working with this team, and I'm going to be making an official announcement video about who I'm working with and what the whole story is in the next week or so. But I'm stoked on it, and shirts are on sale there and stuff like that, and I'm going to be migrating my resources over there. So that's canceliancarroll.com for anyone that wants to follow along there.
Awesome. Thank you for that, brother. Appreciate it. And anybody who wants to find my work, again, it's theconsciousresistance.com. You can find my articles at thelastamericanvagabond.com. And until next time, everybody, thanks for being here. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.